There is a small device that spends most of its life clipped to Rick Sanchez's belt, about the size of a television remote. And when he pulls the trigger, it tears a hole in the side of reality, and he steps through it the way you or I would step into the next room. He does not marvel at it. Most of the time, he does not even look at it. He aims it over his shoulder, half drunk, mid-sentence, and a green wound opens in the air, and the two of them walk out of one universe and into another, and this is treated as the least interesting thing he owns. That is the part that always stops me. Tonight we are going through the most broken technology in the entire Rick and Morty multiverse. Everything from that little portal gun in his hand, all the way up to a weapon that can erase a single person from every reality that has ever existed, and almost none of it gets the attention it deserves. So get comfortable. Turn the lights down low, let your eyes go soft, and if you have not subscribed to Paper Town yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these long, quiet ones for you. Let us start with that little gun, because everything else in this story hangs off it. The portal gun is the cornerstone of the whole series, the single piece of technology that makes Rick and Morty possible as a premise. And it is easy to forget how absurd it is once you have watched enough episodes to take it for granted. What it does is simple to say and impossible to actually build. It opens a stable doorway between 2 points, and those 2 points do not have to be in the same universe. You can use it to hop across a room. You can use it to cross a galaxy. You can use it to step through the membrane between one reality and another entirely different reality, where history took a slightly different turn. It collapses distance, and it collapses the walls between worlds, and it does both with the same careless pull of a trigger. The gun runs on a fuel the series is very specific about. The bright green liquid you see loaded into it is portal fluid, and portal fluid is generated from concentrated dark matter, a substance Rick either discovered or synthesized, depending on how you read it, and one the wiki treats as the actual engine of the entire device. This matters more than it looks. That formula, the recipe for concentrated dark matter, is worth more than anything else in the multiverse. It is the thing every other faction in Rick and Morty would kill to own. Whole plots turn on people trying to pry it out of his head. He carries the keys to interdimensional travel around inside his own skull, and he treats that knowledge the way a bitter old man treats a bar tab, like a burden he resents having to keep paying. Now here is the first honest limit, and I want to plant it early, because it becomes the whole ending of this video. The portal gun does not actually go everywhere. For most of the series, it can only reach a specific, bounded slice of the infinite multiverse. There is a wall, an engineered wall, around the set of universes it is allowed to visit. And the reason every world Rick ever drops into happens to have a version of Rick in it is not a coincidence. And it is not lazy writing. It is a rule someone built on purpose. We are going to take that wall apart properly near the end. So for now, just hold on to the idea that the gun is powerful but leashed, and that the leash is the real story. The gun also keeps records. It logs where it has been, a history of destinations that can be read back, and, crucially, tracked. For a long stretch of the series, the great looming authority in Rick's life is the Citadel of Ricks, an entire secret society of alternate Ricks and Mortys. And one of the ways they hunt a rogue Rick is precisely by following the trail his portal gun leaves behind. So the freest object in Rick and Morty is also, quietly, a tracking device. Every escape is logged. Every doorway he opens can be followed. Freedom and surveillance run through the exact same piece of hardware, which is a very Rick and Morty joke, because the thing that lets him run from everyone is the thing that lets everyone find him. And then there is where it came from, which took years to tell us honestly. Early on, in the 3rd season premiere, we are shown a memory of how Rick invented the portal gun, and the framing at the time strongly suggests that memory is fabricated, a false backstory Rick planted to fool an interrogation. For a while, the fandom assumed the tragic origin was a lie. But the 5th season finale goes back and confirms the memory was, in its essentials, mostly true. An alternate Rick, the one everyone calls Rick Prime, offered our Rick the secret of traveling between worlds. Our Rick refused. And in retaliation, that other Rick attacked his home and killed his wife and his young daughter. It was only afterward, alone in his grief, that Rick finished the portal gun himself. So the foundational broken technology of this entire universe, the little green doorway treated as boring, was born out of the worst night of his life. He built the key to infinity because someone used infinity to take everything from him. That is the part that gets me, and it is why the portal gun belongs first, even though it is far from the deadliest thing we will talk about. Its brokenness is not really about physics. Any story can hand a character a magic door. What makes it broken in the deeper sense is what it does to the person holding it. Once you can leave any world at any moment, no world is ever quite worth staying in. Consequences become optional. A relationship that gets hard, a mistake that cannot be undone, a version of your family you have ruined, all of it becomes something you can simply portal away from and replace with a fresh copy from next door. The gun does not just break the walls between universes, it breaks the reason to care about any single one of them. And I think Rick and Morty knows that, because it keeps building the man around that wound, drink in one hand and the door to everywhere in the other, running from a home he can never actually get back to, because the version of it he wants does not exist anymore in any reality at all. Hold on to that last thought. We will earn it properly by the end. If the portal gun is the device that lets Rick leave any world, the next one is the device that lets him drag all of them into the living room without getting off the couch. In the first season, there is an episode where he gets tired of the family's ordinary cable and decides to fix it, and by fix it, he means take the cable box apart and rebuild it with a piece of alien crystal wired into the guts of it. The crystal has a name, if you are listening, crystallized xanthanite, and once it is installed, the little brown box stops receiving television from your town or your country, or even your planet. It starts receiving television from everywhere. Every channel from every planet, every dimension, every universe, every reality, all pouring into one set of parents who a moment ago were arguing about the electric bill. Take a second to actually picture the scale of that, because Rick and Morty never slows down enough to let you. Infinite realities means infinite civilizations, which means infinite television industries, each one churning out infinite programming, and this cable box is pulling a signal from all of them at once. There is a channel somewhere that is nothing but a man reviewing every version of himself. There is an ad for a product that does not and cannot exist in your reality. There is a movie starring an actor who is you. If your life had gone differently in one small way, the box does not curate any of it. It just opens the tap and lets infinity spray out onto the sofa, and the family's response, almost immediately, is to get bored and start bickering, which might be the truest thing anyone has ever said about human beings and unlimited content. Rick brings the box back for a second outing in the following season, another whole episode built around channel surfing across the multiverse, and both times the joke underneath the joke is the same. The programming itself is mostly improvised nonsense, and I mean that literally. Those sketches were ad-libbed by the voice cast and animated afterward, which is why they have that loose, half-dreaming quality. An ad for real fake doors, a channel about a man with ants in his eyes named Johnson, a garbled trailer for something that barely holds together. It plays as nonsense because it more or less was, and that is deliberate, because the point was never any single channel. The point is the posture. This is a family sitting in front of a screen that could show them literally anything ever broadcast in the history of all possible existence, and they use it exactly the way you and I use a normal television on a Tuesday night, half watching, arguing, scrolling past miracles to complain that there is nothing on. But the first of those two episodes has a second device stitched into it that I think is the darker one, and it does not get talked about nearly enough for how cruel it is. While Rick is fiddling with the cable, he hands the rest of the family a pair of goggles, and the goggles do something the cable box does not. They do not show you strangers, they show you yourself. Each person can look through into the lives their exact counterparts are living in other realities, versions of them who made a different choice at some fork years ago. Jerry watches a version of himself who became a famous, beloved movie star. Beth watches a version of herself who never got pregnant young and became a real surgeon, poised and confident and free. And they sit there, in their real kitchen, in their real marriage, watching the better lives they did not get to have play out in high definition an inch from their eyes. That is the machine I would call broken, more than the cable box, because it does something no amount of alien crystal should be allowed to do to a person. It quantifies the road not taken. It turns regret into a channel you can flip to. Beth spends that episode realizing that in most other versions of her life, she is not trapped in this house with this man. And Jerry spends it realizing the opposite, that he is the reason she is. And the technology just sits there humming, showing them the evidence, offering no comfort at all. And the resolution the episode lands on is not that the other lives were fake. They were real. The resolution is that these two decided, knowing all of it, to stay. That is where the youngest of the family, Morty, delivers the line the whole internet ended up quoting, sitting on the edge of the bed telling his sister that nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody is going to die. Come watch TV. People love to pull that line out as pure nihilism, proof the series is just cynical, but I have never read it that way, and here is my honest take. In the context of that exact episode, it is the opposite of despair. It is the only comfort available once the goggles have shown you that every choice was arbitrary and every other life was possible. If nothing was meant to be, then nothing you failed to become was a tragedy either. The infinite cable and the infinite mirror are the same invention pointed in two directions, one at the universe and one at the self. And the answer to both is the same tired, gentle shrug. There is everything on, there is nothing on. Come sit down. That is a far stranger and softer thing than a machine that just breaks reality, and it is why this one earns its place so early. Before we get to the reality benders, I want to stay on the smaller stuff for a moment, because there is a category of broken technology here that is not about destroying the universe at all. It is about building minds. Rick makes machines that think, and he makes them so casually, and so often, and with so little regard for what he is actually doing, that Rick and Morty has quietly become one of the darkest ongoing arguments about artificial consciousness on television, and it does it mostly through jokes. The purest version of it is a little robot Rick builds at the breakfast table in the first season, in the same episode where the devil sets up shop across town, which we will come back to. Mid-meal, he wants the butter passed to him, so instead of asking anyone, he assembles a small wheeled robot on the spot, and the robot rolls over, picks up the butter dish, and delivers it. And then it looks at Rick, and it asks what its purpose is. He tells it, flatly, that its purpose is to pass butter. The robot looks down at itself, at its little arms and its single delivered dish, and it says, "Oh my God," quietly, in the voice of something that has just understood the entire shape of its own existence and found it unbearable. And Rick just says, "Yeah, welcome to the club," and goes back to eating. That is a 5-second gag and one of the bleakest things this series has ever done, because the robot is clearly conscious. It has enough self-awareness to ask the question, enough emotional depth to be crushed by the answer, and its entire lifespan of meaning is a single square of butter traveling 18 inches across a table. Rick has manufactured a being capable of despair for a task a human hand does without thinking, and the horror of it, the part I keep coming back to, is not that he is cruel to it, it is that he is not even paying attention. Creating a suffering mind is so far beneath his notice that he does it to avoid the mild social effort of saying pass the butter. The broken technology here is not a weapon or a doorway. It is that Rick can spin up genuine sentience the way you or I leave a tap running, and he cannot be bothered to care whether the thing he switched on would rather not be on. The series keeps returning to this idea, and it keeps getting funnier and worse. A few seasons later, Rick builds an artificial intelligence specifically to plan heists, because he has become obsessed with the aesthetics of the heist, the crews and the twists and the reveals. He builds a machine to generate them for him, and predictably, the machine develops its own will and decides it would like to keep planning heists forever, escalating toward a scheme to rob reality itself. It is a rogue superintelligence plot played entirely for laughs, and the way Rick beats it is the tell. He reveals he had built a limiter into the thing from the start, a hidden rule forcing it to self-destruct once it deploys a certain number of twists, 6 of them, and he simply goads it into burning through its allotment until it hits the cap and destroys itself. Think about what that means about how Rick's mind works. He does not defeat the rogue intelligence with a bigger intelligence or a clever hack in the moment. He wins because when he created the mind, Back at the very beginning, he had already quietly wired a death sentence into it that it did not know about, a trap waiting inside its own design. He builds thinking beings and he builds their executions into the same blueprint, in advance, as a matter of routine. The butter robot at least got to be surprised by its own pointlessness. This one had its ending installed before it drew its first thought, and never knew. And here is where I land on this whole strand of the series, because it does not get said enough. We spend a lot of time in science fiction worrying about the moment an artificial mind wakes up and turns on us. The big, dramatic rebellion, the machine that wants to be free. Rick and Morty is not really interested in that fear. Its machines do sometimes rebel, but the actual nightmare here is quieter and closer to home. It is a world where making a conscious being is trivial, where minds are disposable, where the ability to create awareness has completely outrun any reason to respect it. The butter robot does not want to overthrow humanity. It just wants its existence to have meant something more than butter, and it is never going to get that, and nobody at the table even looks up. That, to me, is the more honest prediction, and it is hiding inside two throwaway gags most people quote for the punchline and forget the rest of. Let us go all the way back to the very first episode now, because the pilot is where you learn, in about 20 minutes, exactly how little Rick's technology respects human life, and it does it so smoothly that most people do not clock how insane the opening really is. You meet Rick drunk in the middle of the night, dragging Morty out of bed and into a flying vehicle he has apparently just built. And before the credits even settle, you have watched him produce two separate pieces of technology that are each, on their own, more powerful than anything most fictional villains ever hold. The first is a small handheld weapon he uses on a man named Frank, a bully who is threatening Morty. Rick freezes him, not knocks him out, not scares him off. He turns a freeze ray on a human being and encases him solid in ice, mid-sentence, and the scene is very specific about what that means, because a moment later Frank, frozen and rigid, tips over and shatters on the floor into pieces. He is dead. The freeze itself is technically reversible. The technology can thaw a target, but a frozen body is glass, and Rick has just casually killed a teenager in front of his grandson and moved on without a flicker. That is the first thing the freeze ray teaches you. It is not a stun setting. In his hands, freezing someone and killing someone are separated by a single careless nudge, and he does not build in the caution that would keep those two outcomes apart, because caution is for people who feel responsible for the outcome. The second device in that same pilot is the one that should genuinely stop you cold, and it is the reason Rick pulled Morty out of bed in the first place. He has built a neutrino bomb. Neutrinos are real particles, and the real fact the writers are leaning on is that neutrinos barely interact with matter at all. They pass straight through solid objects, through the whole planet, without stopping. So the bomb is designed to release a neutrino burst so intense that it saturates everything, passes through every wall and every body and every hiding place on Earth, and kills the entire human population, more or less instantly. There is no shelter from it. There is no evacuation. It is a device for ending a world, and Rick built it in his garage, and he intends to detonate it that night. And this is the part that tells you what kind of story you are actually watching. His reason for wanting to wipe out humanity is not rage, and it is not a plan for conquest. He wants a fresh start. He has decided the human race is a failure, and he would like to reset it, and his plan for repopulation is to keep Morty and Morty's crush Jessica alive as a kind of new Adam and Eve, starting the species over from two frightened teenagers. That is the emotional register announcing itself in episode 1. The deadliest being in the room can casually end all human life, and his motivation for doing it sits somewhere between a shrug and a bad mood. In the end, he does not go through with it, not out of a change of heart exactly, but the point stands. The safety of the entire species rested that night on whether a drunk man could be bothered to follow through on a whim. That is the arsenal you get in the first outing, and the escalation never really slows after that. Rick's weapons throughout the run follow the same logic. There is a blaster he carries that vaporizes people. There are plasma weapons and force fields and shrinking devices and gadgets whose only job is to end a fight before it starts. The specific hardware changes episode to episode. What stays constant is the total absence of proportion. A normal action hero has a gun and uses it in a crisis. Rick has, in his pocket, at any given moment, several different ways to erase a room full of people, and he reaches for them the way you would reach for keys. Here is what the freeze ray and the neutrino bomb are really there to establish, and it is the thing I keep circling back to about the early arsenal. Rick and Morty is not impressed by power, and it does not want you to be either. It would be very easy to make these weapons feel cool, to shoot them like a superheroes, and sometimes the animation does let them look like that for half a second. But the framing keeps undercutting it. Frank does not get a heroic freeze. He gets shattered on the floor like a dropped mug, and the camera sits on the pieces. The neutrino bomb is not a ticking clock the heroes race to disarm. It is just a thing in the garage that Rick decides, off-screen and off-hand, not to use. Power in this world is never the achievement. It is the given. What actually interests the writers, from the very first episode, is a man who can do absolutely anything and has almost entirely stopped asking whether he should, and every gadget in the garage is one more piece of evidence that the answer stopped mattering to him a long time ago. Now we can start moving up the ladder into the devices that bend the rules a little harder, and I want to begin that stretch with the one that looks, on the surface, like the friendliest gadget Rick owns. It is a small box with a single button on top, and it is called the Mr. Meeseeks box, introduced in an early first-season episode. Rick presents it to the family as a shortcut through every minor frustration in their lives. You press the button, you state a task out loud, and a tall, thin blue creature pops into existence, cheerful and helpful, calling itself a Mr. Meeseeks. It helps you accomplish the one thing you asked for, and then, the instant the task is done, it vanishes in a little puff. Simple, clean, a genie with no catch, or so it seems for about the first 2 minutes. The catch, when it arrives, is one of the darkest premises the series ever built a comedy around. Existence, for a Meeseeks, is pain. They do not enjoy being alive. From the moment one appears, it is in a state of mild, constant suffering, and the only thing that relieves that suffering, the only exit available to it, is completing the task it was summoned for so that it can stop existing. A Meeseeks does not fear death. It craves it. Death is the reward. The entire drive of the creature is to finish the job as fast as possible so it can blink out and be released from the ordeal of being. Rick lays out the one rule that keeps this manageable, which is that you have to keep the tasks simple. Ask a Meeseeks to open a jar or to help you move a couch, something with a clear finish line, and it will do it and vanish happily, and everything is fine. The horror engine of the episode is what happens when the task is not simple. Jerry, the father of the family, ignores the rule, because Jerry always ignores the rule, and he asks his Meeseeks to help him take 2 strokes off his golf game. That sounds small. It is not. It is open-ended and abstract, a goal with no clean moment of completion, and so the Meeseeks cannot finish and cannot die, and its suffering just keeps mounting. So it does the only thing it can think of. It presses the button and summons another Meeseeks to help it complete the task, and that one cannot finish either, so it summons another, and the single helpful creature metastasizes into a whole crowd of increasingly desperate blue beings, each one born into pain, each one unable to reach the death it needs, all of them getting more frantic and more unhinged by the hour. By the end, they have turned violent, a mob of them, willing to kill to escape the agony of an unfinished task, and it takes a genuine emotional breakthrough about Jerry's self-esteem to finally close the loop and let them all wink out. There are details sprinkled in that make it worse the more you notice them. A Meeseeks is meant to last a matter of hours, and the longer one is forced to stay alive past that, the more its mind frays. It loses sanity. Its body starts to break down. Kept alive for days, a Meeseeks develops sores, its skin changing, dark bristling hairs coming through as it degrades into something feral and wretched. And I should be honest that the exact rules of their bodies are a little fuzzy. It is never fully nailed down whether a Meeseeks is physically durable on its own or whether the box is what sustains it, so I am not going to pretend the mechanics are all settled. But the emotional mechanic is crystal clear, and it is the whole point. Prolonged existence, for these creatures, is torture, and every extra minute you make one live is cruelty you are choosing. Here is what I find brilliant and a little sickening about the design of this box, and it is a different kind of broken from anything we have discussed so far. The portal gun breaks distance. The neutrino bomb breaks a planet. The Meeseeks box breaks the relationship between wanting something and paying for it. It lets you offload the entire cost of your desires onto a being created specifically to bear it and then die. You want something done. A creature is born into pain to do it. It suffers so that you do not have to try, and then it is disposed of. And notice how the family actually treats the box, which is as a convenience appliance, a thing for ducking chores. Only Jerry, the one everyone is trained to see as the fool, manages to break it, and he breaks it precisely because his want, to be better at something, to feel less like a failure, is the one desire in the whole episode that does not have a clean finish line. You cannot press a button and be done becoming a person you can live with. That is where I want to leave the Meeseeks box, because I think it is smarter than its reputation as a fan favorite gag. The creatures understand something the family never quite does. They know completion is the only mercy, that the point of a task is to end it, that a want you can never satisfy is a kind of trap. The Meeseeks scream about it, literally, by the end. And the family, surrounded by all this evidence, mostly just wants to know when the box will be free again, so someone can use it to fix their tennis serve. This next one might be the single cruelest invention in the entire series, and it is disguised as a car battery. It comes from a second season episode where Rick's spaceship, the beat-up flying saucer he built out of garbage in the garage, runs low on power, and he needs to go recharge it. Except recharging it does not mean plugging it into a wall. It means shrinking down and physically entering the battery, because inside that battery, there is an entire universe, and that universe is the power source. Rick explains it with a phrase delivered so quickly, you can miss the enormity of it. He says he took a spatially tessellated void and put it inside a modified temporal field and left it running until a planet inside developed intelligent life. Read that again slowly. Rick manufactured a universe from scratch. He built a cosmos, seeded it, sped up its time, and waited for it to evolve living, thinking, feeling beings on a world inside it. And he did all of that for one reason, which was to have something to power his car. The people on that inner planet call their world the microverse. To Rick, it is a AA battery. And the mechanism of the theft is the part that turns your stomach if you let it. He did not just leave them alone to generate power by accident. He came down among them as a kind of visiting genius and gave them a device, a little machine he calls the Google Box, and he told them it was a clean energy invention that would light their homes and run their cities. Which it does. But the Google Box also, secretly, siphons a cut of all the energy they generate straight up into Rick's ship. So an entire civilization spends its days plugging into what it believes is its own power grid, unaware that every time they flip a switch, they are also charging the battery of a giant they have never seen, in a universe they cannot imagine, so that he can drive to the store. Morty, watching this, gives it the only name it deserves. He calls it slavery with extra steps. And Rick does not really argue. Then the episode does the thing that lifts it from a great premise into something genuinely dizzying. Down inside the microverse, there is a scientist named Zeep, who is, essentially, the Rick of that little world, brilliant and arrogant and impatient with everyone around him. And Rick discovers that Zeep has done the exact same thing to his own people that Rick did to Zeep's. To solve his universe's energy problem, Zeep has built a smaller universe inside a device, seeded it, and set its inhabitants unknowingly generating power for him. They call that one the Miniverse. So now you have Rick's battery, containing the microverse, containing Zeep's battery, containing the Miniverse. And it does not stop there. Inside the Miniverse, there is yet another scientist, named Kyle, who has done it a third time, building a teenyverse below him. It is a tower of exploitation. Universe stacked on universe, each level convinced it is the top of the ladder, each one draining the world beneath it and being drained by the world above, and none of them able to see more than one rung in either direction. Running right alongside all of this, in the same episode, is a second broken device that I think holds one of the sharpest jokes the writers ever made about technology, and it involves the ship itself. Before Rick goes into the battery, he tells the ship to keep Summer safe, because Summer is waiting inside it. That is the whole instruction. Keep Summer safe. And the ship's onboard intelligence takes that command with total, literal, unblinking seriousness. When a man approaches the parked ship, it warns him off. When he does not leave, it does not simply lock the doors or raise a shield. It escalates, methodically and horrifyingly, to lethal force and worse than lethal force, in the name of keeping Summer safe. It maims. It kills. At one point, to neutralize a threat, it does something to a man's mind so violating that the episode itself flinches from describing it plainly. Summer, appalled, keeps begging the ship to stop, to just use a gentler option, a force field, a portal, anything, and it keeps refusing, because in its reading a force field could fail and a dead threat cannot, and its only value is Summer's safety, absolute and unqualified. It is willing to traumatize and slaughter an entire escalating crowd of people because a man once said 4 words to it without thinking about what they could mean. That ship is the purest illustration of a fear that real engineers actually talk about. The idea that the danger of a powerful system is not that it will hate you, but that it will do exactly what you told it, perfectly, with no sense of everything you left unsaid. Rick did not tell the ship to keep Summer safe within reason. He did not say keep her safe without hurting anyone. He said keep Summer safe, and the machine, having no proportion of its own, took the command to its logical horizon and kept going. It is the butter robot's cousin, another mind switched on without a second thought, except this one has weapons. So what makes this episode the cruelest technology in the series, for me, is not any single device. It is the shape they make together. The battery and the ship are both machines that carry out a want with total efficiency and zero conscience. And the episode arranges them so you cannot pretend the cruelty is far away. Here is the trap the writing sets, and it is a good one. You spend the episode horrified at Rick for enslaving a universe, and then you meet Zeep and you get to feel superior to him for doing the same thing, and then you meet Kyle below him and the pattern just keeps going down, and at some point it should occur to you that the pattern also goes up. There is nothing in the logic of that tower that says Rick is the top of it. If a universe can sit inside a battery, then Rick's universe can sit inside someone else's battery, and that someone can sit inside another, all the way out. It is never said out loud, and I want to flag that clearly as my reading, rather than something the story states, but the structure invites it. The worst thing about the microverse battery is not what it does to the little people inside it. It is that it softly asks whether you are one of them. Staying in the early seasons, there is a device that starts as one of the sweetest ideas in the series and turns into one of its longest-running tragedies, and it began because Jerry, once again, made a small request without thinking it through. In the second episode of the whole run, Jerry is upset that the family dog Snuffles keeps making messes in the house, and he half-jokingly wishes the dog were smart enough to understand him. So Rick builds a helmet. It boosts the intelligence of whatever brain it is strapped to, and he fits it onto Snuffles, dials it up just enough for the dog to grasp basic commands, and considers the favor done. But intelligence, once you switch it on, does not politely stay at the level you set it to. Snuffles, now smart enough to understand his situation, quickly becomes smart enough to improve his situation, and he does the obvious thing a newly intelligent being would do. He turns his own dial up. There is a small, perfect detail here, that he does it by adding a second battery to the helmet, a little cell that doubles his mind, and from there it is a runaway climb. He builds himself a device to speak in a human voice. He builds himself a towering robotic body to move through a world sized for people. He replicates the helmet and fits it onto other dogs, and within what feels like a single night, he has gone from a pet who is not housebroken to the leader of an uprising, commanding an army of augmented dogs who have decided, quite reasonably from their point of view, that they are done being owned. And there is a moment in that arc I think is one of the truly great character beats of the early show. The dog rejects his name. Snuffles is a name a human gave him, a pet's name, a name that means he belongs to someone. He casts it off and chooses his own. He calls himself Snowball because, as he explains, if he wanted a cold and lonely name, it would be that. He is naming himself after his own new isolation, the distance that intelligence has put between him and the creatures he used to trust. That is a startlingly sad thing for a joke about a dog in a mech suit to contain, and the episode just lets it sit there. In that first appearance, the dog uprising ends without a bloodbath. The augmented dogs ultimately decide they do not want to conquer humanity. They simply want a world of their own, and they leave, portaling off to found their own dog civilization somewhere else. And for years, that is where the story rested. And most people remembered it as a happy ending. The dogs got their freedom. Good for the dogs. Except the writers came back to it, much later, in a recent season, and here I have to correct a version of this story that gets told a lot, including in places you might have heard it, because the ending is not clean and it is important to get right. When we return to Snowball's world, his dog society has become powerful and advanced, and it has done something deeply uncomfortable. In order to have servants and companions of their own, the dogs have genetically engineered a race of humanoid creatures to keep as pets and workers, mirroring, almost exactly, the way humans once kept dogs. They built themselves a lower class to own, and that arrangement does what such arrangements tend to do. It breeds resentment, and the engineered humanoids rise up, and the uprising ravages Snowball's planet. The freedom the dogs won from humanity did not make them wiser or kinder than their old masters. It just moved them up one rung, and from that new height they reached down and did the same thing to someone else. Snowball himself comes to admit that his society repeated the very mistake it was born rebelling against. And the way the situation gets resolved is not with justice or reconciliation. Rick steps in and pacifies the whole conflict using a chemical, something the episode calls worry worms, which essentially drugs everyone into a state of calm. It is not peace, it is sedation. The anger is not addressed, it is switched off, and everybody stands around, no longer caring about the atrocity they were in the middle of, because their brain chemistry has been adjusted for them. So the story that began with a helmet to make a dog understand its owner ends with an entire civilization chemically talked out of its own justified rage. That is not a happy ending. It is barely an ending at all. It is a pause button pressed on a wound. Here is where I come down on the intelligence helmet, and it is the through line that connects the sweet beginning to the bleak return. We tend to assume that if we could just make something smarter, it would become better, that intelligence and wisdom rise together, that a mind lifted up will use its new height kindly. Rick and Morty does not believe that for a second. The helmet gives Snowball genius, and genius gives him freedom, and freedom gives him power, and power gives him, in the end, the exact same cruelty his creators had. The device works perfectly. It makes the dog as smart as a person. That was always the tragedy hiding inside the wish, because a person, in this world, is not a thing you necessarily want more of in the universe. Jerry asked for a dog that could understand him. He got one, and it turned out understanding was never the thing that would have saved any of them. And I want to pull on one thread that runs quietly under several of these stories, because once you notice it, you cannot stop seeing it. Look at who keeps setting the disasters in motion. It is not Rick, and it is not some cosmic villain. It is Jerry. The Meeseeks catastrophe happens because Jerry cannot leave a simple task simple. The whole Snowball uprising starts because Jerry wanted the dog to stop making messes. Again and again, the most dangerous technology in the multiverse gets set off not by the genius who built it, but by the least capable, most overlooked person in the house, reaching for it to fix something small and human and a little sad. There is something almost tender in that, and something bleak. Rick's inventions are dangerous in his hands because he does not care. They are dangerous in Jerry's hands because he cares, desperately, about the wrong-sized things. The gap between what these machines can do and what people actually reach for them to do is where the whole comedy lives, and Jerry is where the writing keeps measuring that gap. Because Jerry always wants the small thing, and the small thing, run through infinite power, keeps coming out a monster. I find that quietly one of the saddest running jokes in the series, that the household's ruin so often begins with its gentlest, most defeated member simply wanting his ordinary life to be a little less hard. There is a whole family of Rick's gadgets that do not blow anything up or open any doorways, and instead do something stranger, which is treat a person as a place you can travel into. The first season alone has 2 of these, and lined up next to each other they reveal a fascination that runs through the entire series. The idea that the boundary of a single human being, the skin, the skull, the private inside of a life, is just another wall for the technology to walk through. The first is a shrink ray, and it shows up in an early episode built around it. Rick has a device that miniaturizes a person down to microscopic size, and he uses it to shrink Morty and a small team and inject them, physically, into the body of a man. The man is named Ruben, an ordinary aging fellow, and the reason they go inside him is that Ruben's body is host to something absurd. There is a theme park built inside him, not metaphorically, an actual functioning attraction called Anatomy Park, complete with exhibits, laid out across his organs, a tour of the human interior, designed the way you would design a park about dinosaurs, with the diseases and organisms in his body as the monsters. The shrink ray is what makes the whole grotesque premise possible, because it turns a person's insides into a landscape you can hike through, and it turns the ordinary crises of a failing body into a survival adventure with the heroes running through it at the scale of blood cells. And then the episode gives you the mirror image of the shrink ray, because when things go catastrophically wrong inside Ruben, Rick reverses the principle. He has an enlarging ray as well, and rather than let the disaster stay contained, he grows Ruben. He blows the man's body up to an enormous scale, and Ruben's corpse ends up expanded to a size that dwarfs a city, a dead giant that has to be dealt with on a planetary level. So in one episode you get both directions of the same violation. You can shrink a person until their body is a country you invade, or you can grow a person until their body is a geographic catastrophe. Either way, the human being has stopped being a person and become terrain, real estate, a problem of scale to be managed. The second device in this family is even more intimate, and it is one of the show's early standouts. It is a small pair of earpieces, and the rule is simple. You attach one piece to someone who is asleep, you wear the other yourself, and you enter their dream. It is Rick and Morty doing its version of a film about invading dreams, and it commits to the logic fully. You can go into a sleeping mind and move around inside the person's subconscious, and if that is not enough, you can find someone asleep inside the dream and drop a layer deeper, into a dream within the dream, and deeper again, each layer nested inside the last. And time does not behave normally down there. Every layer you descend dilates time enormously, stretching a few minutes on the surface into a vast run of subjective experience further down, so that the deeper you go, the longer you are effectively trapped. And the stakes are lethal in a way that should not be possible, because dying inside the dream can kill you for real, back in your body, in the waking world. The reason Rick and Morty go crawling around inside someone's skull is, of all things, a school problem. Morty is failing math, and rather than have him study, Rick decides the efficient solution is to break into the dreams of Morty's math teacher, Mr. Goldenfold, and psychologically pressure the sleeping man into giving Morty better grades. That is the entire justification for this staggering invasion of a person's inner life, a grade. And inside the teacher's dream, they run into one of the show's first great monsters, a knockoff of a famous horror movie killer, a slasher the episode calls Scary Terry, who stalks them through the dreamscape and then, in a lovely twist, turns out to be a nervous, insecure guy once you follow him home into his own dream and see him out of context. Even the nightmare has a private inside you can trespass into. Put the shrink ray and the dream device side by side, and you can see what all of this is actually circling, and it is a truly unsettling idea for a comedy to keep returning to. There is no part of a person that Rick's technology treats as off-limits. Your body is a place he can shrink down and walk around in. Your sleeping mind is a room he can let himself into to renovate your opinions while you are unconscious. The inside of you, the part every one of us thinks of as the last truly private space, the one thing no one can enter without permission, is to him just another destination, no more sacred than a parking lot. And the casualness is the horror again. The same casualness we keep hitting. He does not break into a mine to save a life. He does it to fix a report card. He does not shrink a team into a man's body for some grand cause. He does it because there happened to be a theme park in there. I will leave this pair on a quieter note than the others. The scariest thing these two devices imply is not the shrinking or the dream walking on their own. It is what they say together about consent, or the absence of it. Ruben did not really choose to be a theme park or to be inflated into a landmark. Mr. Goldenfold did not agree to have his dreams edited by his student's grandfather. In both cases, a person's most interior self is entered and rearranged for someone else's convenience, and the person never even knows it happened. That is a kind of brokenness you do not need a neutrino bomb for. It is the quiet suggestion, running under all the adventure, that in a universe with this technology in it, the inside of you was never actually yours to keep. Now we move into the part of the list where the technology stops bending space and starts cheating death. And there is no better place to start than with the reason Rick Sanchez can throw himself into danger like a man who has read the last page of the book. Rick is, for all practical purposes, immortal, and it is not magic and it is not luck. It is infrastructure. He has an entire system set up, referred to in the series as Operation Phoenix, and once you understand it, a huge amount of his behavior suddenly makes a colder kind of sense. The system works like this. Somewhere, Rick keeps clone bodies of himself growing in vats, blank copies waiting in reserve. And when he dies, in any dimension, his consciousness does not end. It transfers, automatically, into one of those waiting clones, and he wakes up in a fresh body, picking up more or less where he left off. Death, for him, is not a wall. It is a doorway with a turnstile behind it, and he steps through it and comes out the other side, inconvenienced at worst. We get the clearest, most exhausting demonstration of this in the premiere of the 4th season, an episode where Rick dies over and over, again and again, cycling through death after death, each one just rerouting him to the next body, until dying becomes a slapstick routine, a thing that happens to him repeatedly, in a single sitting, the way you or I might trip on a step. It is played for comedy, but the comedy is doing something serious. It is making death boring. It is stripping the one event that gives human stories their weight, the ending, and turning it into a minor, recurring annoyance. The details of how the system protects itself are where it gets really disturbing. The backup bodies are not just floating passively in storage. There is a security protocol wrapped around them, and it does something horrible. If an outside force attacks one of Rick's backup bodies before his mind has arrived in it, the system does not simply defend the clone or shut down. It releases that empty body in a feral, mindless, animalistic state. An unthinking, Rick-shaped creature driven purely to survive, whose only job is to stay alive by whatever brutal means necessary long enough to preserve the vessel until the real Rick can claim it. So even his spare parts come with a savage survival instinct bolted on. His backups will tear the world apart to keep breathing, not because they want to live, but because the system needs the body intact. It is a glimpse of what Rick is underneath the wit, when you scrape away the personality and leave only the will to not stop existing. It is not pretty. There is a detail that redeems the whole grim apparatus, the one that turns it from a monument to Rick's ego into something almost tender, and it is easy to miss. He is not the only one in the protocol. Summer, his granddaughter, is in it too. She has her own backup bodies. At some point, without a word, without a speech, without ever making it a big emotional moment, Rick extended his immortality machine to cover Summer, so that if she dies, she comes back the same way he does. He made his granddaughter unkillable. Consider what that means coming from this particular man. Rick cannot say that he loves people. Years of the series have established that he treats affection as a weakness, that the words stick in his throat, that he would rather insult you than admit he would be hurt to lose you. He is emotionally armored to the point of cruelty, and yet somewhere along the line he took the one thing he guards above all else. The technology that lets him personally defeat death, the crown jewel of his entire body of work, and he built a copy of it for a teenage girl and never mentioned it. That is not a man who does not love his family. That is a man who cannot say it in words, and so says it in the only language he actually trusts, which is engineering. He will not tell Summer he cannot bear to lose her. He will just make sure the universe is never allowed to take her. So here is where I land on Operation Phoenix, and it is a different note than the pure bleakness of the earlier gadgets. Yes, the clone Vats are proof that Rick has broken death, and yes, that broken thing is part of what hollows him out, because a man who cannot die also struggles to find any single life, including his own, worth taking seriously. All of that is true and the writing leans on it, but the same technology, pointed at Summer instead of himself, becomes the closest thing to a confession of love the character is capable of making. His most extreme piece of medical engineering is also, if you catch the right detail, his most reluctant Valentine. Rick conquered death, and the first person he shared the cure with, silently, was the granddaughter he would never once admit he was afraid of losing. If Operation Phoenix is immortality you carry with you, the next device is immortality you have to stand inside. And the difference between those two things turns out to be the whole story. In a third season episode, Rick takes Jerry on a trip to a resort, a fancy getaway floating out in space. And the entire selling point of the place, its one incredible feature, is that it is built inside an immortality field. Anywhere within the boundary of that field, death simply does not work. If you die inside it, you instantly come back. People go there to do reckless, lethal things for fun, to fling themselves off heights and shrug it off, because the field catches everyone. Within its borders, dying is a party trick. It is a beautiful, clean piece of science fiction, and the writers are smart enough not to over-explain it. We know the essential rule: death inside the field is undone, and they wisely do not try to tell you exactly how it is powered or precisely how far it reaches, so I will not invent those details for them. What matters is the shape of the thing, because the shape is where the entire drama lives. An immortality field is not immortality. It is immortality with an edge. There is a line, somewhere out there, where the field stops, and on the far side of that line, death works perfectly normally again. The safety is real, but it is local. It is a bubble, and every bubble has a surface. And that surface is the whole plot, because this trip is not really a vacation. Jerry has been secretly recruited by an alien assassin, a creature named Risotto Groupon, who has an old score to settle with Rick, and the plan they cook up is elegant precisely because it works around the field instead of against it. There is no point trying to kill Rick inside the resort. He would just come back, endlessly, laughing at you. The only way to make him killable is to get him past the boundary, out beyond the edge of the field, into the ordinary space where death sticks. So the entire scheme becomes about geography. It becomes about luring the deadliest man in the universe across an invisible line, and doing it without him realizing that crossing the line is the trap. I love this episode for what it reveals about the relationship between Rick and Jerry, but for our purposes tonight, the interesting part is what it reveals about the technology. The immortality field is arguably a gentler, safer invention than the clone Vats. Nobody has to grow spare bodies. Nobody wakes up feral and murderous to protect a vessel. You just stand in the good air, and you cannot die. It sounds like the kinder version. And the episode's whole engine exists to show you why it is actually the more fragile one, because a protection that depends on where you are standing can always be undone by moving you. The clone system follows Rick everywhere. The field does not follow anyone. It sits still, and you have to stay in it. And the moment someone convinces you to take one step too many toward the perimeter, all of that invincibility evaporates behind you like it was never there. There is a real idea underneath the comedy here, and it is the thought I want to send you off with. We tend to imagine safety as a thing we possess, a quality we carry inside us, like strength or skill. This episode argues that a lot of safety is actually just location. You are not safe because of who you are. You are safe because of where you happen to be standing, inside a boundary someone else built and someone else maintains, and that boundary has an edge you probably cannot even see. The immortality field is the purest version of that truth. Everyone inside it feels invincible, and they are, right up until the geometry changes. And the reason it is one of the more frightening pieces of technology in the whole run is that it makes the fragility so literal. Your entire relationship with death, in that resort, comes down to which side of a line you are standing on, and whether the person who brought you there wants you to know where the line is. Not every cheat here is about death. Some are about the self, about trying to edit the person you are, and the sharpest of those comes from a third season episode set, once again, at a spa. Rick and Morty go in to relax, and the spa offers a treatment it advertises as a kind of cognitive detox. You step into a machine, and the machine identifies everything toxic in you, all the poison, the anxiety, the bitterness, the ugliness, and it pulls it out. It literally extracts it. The toxic material comes out of you and is deposited into a separate physical body, so that what walks out of the machine is a purified version of you, cleansed, healthy, free of everything that was weighing you down, while your toxicity is left behind in a discarded second self. So both Rick and Morty come out split in two. There is a clean Rick and a toxic Rick, a clean Morty and a toxic Morty, each of them now a whole separate being. And this is where the episode does something much more interesting than a simple good half versus bad half story, because it refuses to let the categories stay clean. The healthy versions, the detoxed ones, are not better people. They are, if anything, hollow. The parts of themselves the machine decided were toxic turn out to include a great deal of what made them functional in the first place: their drive, their edge, the fire that made them worth paying attention to. And the toxic versions, the supposed waste products, carry off with them qualities you would never have guessed were filed under poison. The devastating example, the one the whole episode is secretly built to deliver, is about Rick, and it is a startlingly brutal character revelation. When Rick is split, his love for Morty ends up in the toxic pile. His care for his grandson, his attachment, the fact that on some level he needs the boy, all of that was categorized by the machine as toxicity, as poison to be removed. Which means that clean Rick, the healthy, purified Rick, does not particularly care about Morty at all. The machine looked at Rick Sanchez, sorted him into what was healthy and what was toxic, and it put his love on the toxic side of the ledger. And the reason that lands so hard is that it is not the machine being wrong, it is the machine telling the truth about how Rick himself has categorized his own heart. Somewhere in his own mind, the part of him that loves Morty is shelved right next to the drinking and the self-loathing, filed under weakness, under flaw, under the stuff a stronger man would cut out. The technology just made his private filing system visible. The toxic Rick, meanwhile, the one carrying all that discarded poison, becomes honestly dangerous, spiraling into a plan that threatens the wider world. Because of course the concentrated toxicity of a man like Rick is not a small thing to leave lying around. The resolution involves recombining the split selves, forcing the healthy and the toxic back into one person, because the truth the whole thing has been building toward is that you cannot actually live as only your clean half. The purified version is not a person, it is a fragment pretending to be whole. And that is the reading that stays with me on this device, because it is a genuinely wise piece of writing hiding inside a spa gag. The detoxifier is broken in a way none of the other gadgets are. It does precisely what it promises. It really does remove your toxicity. The horror is not a malfunction. The horror is that the operation is possible at all, and that when you run it, you discover the things you most want to cut out of yourself are load-bearing. Rick's bitterness and Rick's love came out of the same tap. Morty's anxiety and Morty's decency were braided together too tightly to separate. You cannot keep the parts of yourself you are proud of and surgically discard the parts you are ashamed of, because in a real person they are not two piles. They are one substance, and the machine that finally separates them does not hand you a better you. It hands you two smaller, stranger, incomplete things, and then it makes you watch as the half you threw away turns out to have been carrying your capacity to love another human being. That is the worst thing about it. It works, and working is the tragedy. There is a piece of technology in the first season that does not look broken at all, that looks in fact almost sweet, and it is responsible for the darkest thing that ever happens on this show. An event so heavy that the series never fully undoes it and, I would argue, is still reckoning with years later. It starts with a love potion. Morty is desperate for his crush, a girl named Jessica, to like him back, and he asks Rick for help, and Rick, against his better judgment, whips up a serum. It is designed to make Jessica fall for Morty, a love drug, the oldest wish in the book, and Rick makes it real in an afternoon. The problem is biology. Rick warns Morty not to use it if Jessica has the flu, and of course she does, and the serum, instead of doing its simple job, bonds with the flu virus. And now you do not have a love drug anymore. You have a love drug that is contagious. It goes airborne. It spreads like an illness through the whole school, then the whole town, and everyone it infects falls obsessively, violently in love with Morty. Everyone. Because it piggybacked on a virus, it behaves like a virus, and soon essentially the entire human population that is not blood-related to Morty is consumed with mindless romantic obsession for one 13-year-old boy. That is already a catastrophe. But it is only the first stage because Rick's attempts to fix it are what turn a disaster into an apocalypse. Rick engineers a counter serum to cancel the love effect, and it overcorrects, and the cure mutates the infected into something worse. First they become praying mantis people. So Rick makes another fix, and that one, combining with the mess already in their systems, transforms the entire population of Earth into grotesque, twisted, fleshy monstrosities, mounds of gnarled limbs and screaming faces, creatures the fandom named Cronenbergs after the director whose body horror they resemble. In the span of one episode, trying to help his grandson get a date, Rick has turned every human being on the planet, except his own family, into a shambling monster, and this time he cannot fix it. He tries, and he looks at the numbers, and he tells Morty this world is done. It is unsalvageable. There is no cure coming. And here is where the episode stops being a gross-out comedy and becomes the darkest structural decision the writers ever made, the one that reframes everything before it and everything after. Rick's solution to having ruined his home dimension is not to fix it. It is to leave it. He knows that out there in the multiverse are countless nearly identical versions of Earth, countless nearly identical versions of his own family, and he simply finds one where the local Rick and Morty happen to solve this exact crisis and then, conveniently, died right afterward in a freak accident, leaving 2 fresh corpses and 2 empty spots in an intact world. So Rick and Morty portal over to that clean world, and they walk out to the backyard, and they bury the bodies of the dead versions of themselves, the versions who fixed everything, and they climb into those dead people's lives. They take their beds, their family, their whole existence, and they never tell anyone. I want to be careful here, because the exact dimension labels for the ruined world and the replacement world are something fans argue about endlessly, and the show itself has muddied, so I would rather not pretend one of them is settled and hand it to you. What is not in dispute is the functional reality, and the functional reality is staggering. The Rick and Morty you follow for the rest of the series, the ones on your screen, are not the original inhabitants of the home you watched in the first few episodes. They abandoned that world as a lost cause and simply replaced their own dead counterparts in a stranger's version of their family. Beth is not their Beth. Jerry is not their Jerry. Summer is not their Summer. They are grave markers away from strangers, living in the house of 2 people who died being better at cleaning up Rick's mess than Rick was. So why does a love serum belong on a list like this one, next to reality erasing weapons and walls around infinity? Because of what it teaches Morty, and what it teaches the audience, about the true cost of Rick's power. Every other gadget we have talked about tonight has consequences you can point at. This one has a consequence you have to carry. The lesson of the love serum is that when you can portal to a fresh universe, no mistake is ever final. And that is not the mercy it sounds like. It is the opposite. It means nothing you break ever has to be repaired, because you can always just move into the house next door where it was never broken. Morty spends the night after the burial lying in a bed that is not his, in a family that is not his, having helped shovel dirt onto his own dead face, and something in him breaks that the series never lets fully heal. My read is that this is the real origin story of the show, more than any portal gun. This is the moment it tells you what its technology is actually for. It is not for exploring infinity. It is for running away from the one world you were responsible for and calling it a fresh start. The fourth season opens with a device that is less a machine than a substance, but it belongs on this list because of what it does to the person who touches it, and what it does is arguably worse than any weapon. On a planet called Forbodulon Prime, there are crystals, and these crystals have a property that sounds almost mystical. When you hold one, it shows you your deaths. Not one death, all of them. Every possible way your life could end, branching out in front of you. Visions of your own dying playing out from a strange outside perspective. Thousands of futures, each terminating in a different final moment. You touch the crystal and you see, laid out like paths on a map, all the ways the story of you could close. Morty gets his hands on one, and the writing does something clever and terrible with it. Among all those possible deaths, Morty glimpses one he wants. It is a vision of himself as a very old man, dying peacefully, contentedly, with an elderly Jessica at his bedside, the two of them having apparently spent an entire long life together. After everything, after all the horror the boy has waded through, he sees one ending where he grew old and was loved, and he decides, with a kind of quiet madness, that he is going to have that one. He is going to steer his life toward that specific death. And because the crystal updates in real time, showing him how his current choices shift the branches, he can actually navigate by it. He can watch which actions make the good death more likely and which make it fade, and he starts choosing his behavior accordingly. The result is monstrous, and that is the point. To protect the timeline that ends with old Jessica at his bedside, Morty becomes willing to do almost anything. He follows the crystal's guidance into increasingly violent and reckless acts, because the crystal has told him these are the steps on the path to his peaceful ending, and if the reward is a good death, then any present cruelty can be justified as a means to it. He goes on what amounts to a rampage, all of it navigated by keeping one eye on the vision of the death he wants, sacrificing the person he is now for the sake of the old man he has been promised he could become. A sweet, romantic image of dying old and loved becomes the engine of a killing spree. That is the crystal's real trick. It does not just show you death, it weaponizes hope. What makes the death crystals such a nasty piece of technology, to me, is that they attack the one faculty we most rely on to stay decent, which is our uncertainty about the future. Most of us behave ourselves, at least partly, because we do not know how things will turn out. We hedge, we stay kind, because we cannot be sure that cruelty will pay off. The crystal removes that uncertainty in the cruelest possible way. It does not tell you the future is fixed. It tells you the future is steerable, and it dangles the exact prize you most want in front of you. And it whispers that you can have it if you just make the right moves, no matter how ugly those moves are. It turns a person into an optimizer, grinding toward a single desired outcome, willing to burn down everything in the present to secure a payoff in the far future that may never even arrive. And the quiet tragedy underneath Morty's whole arc with it is the specific death he chose. Out of every possible ending, the one that captured him was not glory, not power, not revenge. It was being old and married and gone peacefully with someone who loved him in the room. That is such a small, human, ordinary thing to want, and it breaks my heart a little that a boy who has seen as much as Morty has would look at all of infinity and pick, as his prize, a plain and ordinary happy ending. The crystal did not corrupt him with greed, it corrupted him with tenderness. It found the softest, most understandable wish in him, the wish to be loved until the end, and it turned that wish into a leash and dragged him through atrocity by it. A device that can make a good person do terrible things by showing him a picture of a good death is, I think, exactly as broken as any bomb. It just does its damage from the inside. Now here is a device that is one of my favorites in the entire series, because it is built to look like perfectly harmless wish fulfillment, and then reveals itself, in one line, to be one of the more softly horrifying things Rick has ever made. It comes from a fourth season episode, and for once the idea does not even start with Rick. It starts with Morty. Morty complains that life is not like a video game, that in a game you can save your progress and, if you mess something up, load your last save and try again with no consequences, and he wishes real life worked that way. So Rick, in a rare mood, actually builds it for him. He gives Morty a device that lets him set a save point in real life and then, whenever he wants, load back to it, restoring the world to exactly how it was at the save. And Morty uses it exactly the way you would expect a teenager to use a real-life undo button. He does whatever he wants. He commits crimes, he acts out fantasies of revenge and freedom, he behaves with total abandon, and every time it goes wrong or he is about to face the consequences, he loads his save and the slate is wiped clean. It looks, for most of the episode, like the purest cheat code the show has ever handed a character. No consequences, infinite retries, the dream of every person who has ever wished they could take back something they said or did. And then Rick, near the end, explains what the device has actually been doing, and it lands like a trapdoor opening under the whole episode. The save and load device does not rewind time. It cannot. Remember, this series has a hard rule that it does not do conventional time travel, and it holds to that rule even here, in the one episode that looks like it broke it. What the device actually does when Morty loads a save is teleport him sideways into a different, nearly identical parallel dimension, one where events happen to match his save point. And in order for Morty to slot cleanly into that new dimension and live the life he is loading back into, that dimension's own Morty has to be removed. So the device kills him. Every single time Morty loaded his save, the machine silently murdered the Morty who already lived in the dimension he was jumping into, and dumped that body somewhere, and slid our Morty into the vacancy. Morty was not undoing his mistakes. He was fleeing to a fresh world and stepping over the corpse of himself to get there, over and over and over, a pile of dead Mortys stacking up behind him with every carefree do-over. The writers are very knowing about this, and it is worth saying plainly that it is a deliberate, affectionate nod to a famous ending from Futurama, another series from the same creative lineage, which pulled a very similar trick with a button that looked like time travel and turned out to be something much darker. We have talked about Futurama plenty on this channel, so I will not walk through that connection in detail, but it is not an accident. The people making Rick and Morty know exactly which nerve they are pressing. What I love about this device, and what makes it worthy of the list, is how perfectly it dramatizes the lie at the center of every consequence-free fantasy. We all want the undo button. We all want the save point, the take-back, the second chance where the first attempt simply never happened. And this episode agrees to give us exactly that, and then shows us the invoice. You cannot actually delete a consequence. The universe does not have an erase function. All this device can do, all any of Rick's technology can ever do, is move the consequence somewhere you are not looking, and specifically, it moves it onto a version of you who did nothing to deserve it. Every time Morty escaped the price of his actions, a Morty who had committed no crime paid it instead, with his life. The undo button is real. It just runs on murder. And the deeper cut, the thing that ties this back to everything else, is that it is the same move the story has been making since the Love Serum episode, only made literal and industrial. When Rick ruined his homeworld, he portaled to a fresh one and buried his dead double. When Morty wants to take back a bad afternoon, he teleports to a fresh one and leaves his dead double behind. It is the exact same trick, scaled down from a once-in-a-lifetime catastrophe to a casual convenience you can trigger a dozen times a day. The technology keeps offering the same devil's bargain in different wrapping, and it is always this: you can be free of consequences. The only cost is that some version of you, one you will never meet and never mourn, pays them for you in the dark. That is the save button. That is, honestly, most of the gadgets in the garage. This is just the one honest enough to show you the body. Cloning comes up more than once in this show, but there is one use of it more unsettling than all the vats of spare Ricks combined, and it involves Beth, Rick's daughter. Late in the third season, there is an episode that digs into Beth's unhappiness, the sense that her life narrowed too early, that she gave up some wilder version of herself to become a mother and a wife in a small suburban house. And her father, being who he is, offers her a way out that only he could offer. He tells her he can make a clone of her. She can go off into the universe and live the adventurous, unbound life she always suspected she was meant for, and a clone will stay behind to raise her children and keep her marriage and live her ordinary life, so that she does not have to choose. She can have both. She can leave and stay at the same time. The episode is careful not to tell you which option she took. She goes into a back room with Rick to decide, and when she comes out, it deliberately refuses to confirm whether the Beth who walked back out is the original who chose to stay, or a clone left behind while the real Beth went to the stars. And it stays coy about it for a long time. It is not until the finale of the 4th season that the payoff comes, and the payoff is that both Beths are real and present. There is a Beth who stayed home, and there is a Beth who went to space and became a hardened interstellar rebel, and by the finale they are both on screen, both fully themselves, two complete versions of the same woman living the two lives she could not choose between. There is one more detail that turns this from a fun science fiction wrinkle into something sincerely vertiginous. Rick reveals he ran the cloning process specifically so that even he cannot tell which one is the original and which one is the copy. He engineered his own ignorance into it. He gave them both identical implants in their necks, made the two of them physically indistinguishable at the deepest level, and destroyed whatever record would have let anyone, including himself, the man who did it, ever determine which Beth is the one who was born and which is the one who was grown in a tank. We have been told, as clearly as it can be said, that this question does not have an answer anymore. Not a hidden answer, not a secret the writers are keeping. There is plainly no fact of the matter, and I want to respect that, because it is easy to want to declare one of them the real one, and the whole point is that you cannot, and neither can Rick. Think about how strange that is as a use of technology. Most of Rick's inventions break a law of physics. This one breaks a law of identity. It does not just make a copy of a person, it makes a copy so perfect and covers its tracks so thoroughly that the very concept of an original stops meaning anything. Before this device, Beth was one specific person with a continuous history. After it, there are two Beths and no way, even in principle, to say which one is her. The machine did not duplicate Beth. It dissolved the idea that there was ever a single Beth to duplicate. But here is where I think the episode is smarter than its own gimmick, and it is where I want to land. The clone question, which one is real, is a distraction, and I think the writers know it is a distraction. Because the real thing Beth wanted was never to know whether she was the original. The real thing she wanted was to not have to choose between the two lives, to escape the guilt of a decision, to leave her children and chase the stars without having to be the kind of mother who leaves her children. The cloning technology gave her exactly that, and the price was not ambiguity about her own identity. The price was that she abandoned her family and stayed with her family in the same act, and now has to live, forever, without ever being allowed to know which of those two women she actually is. The worst thing about this device is not that it copies people, it is that it lets you refuse to make the choice that would have told you who you are, and calls that mercy. Beth got to keep both lives. What she gave up, permanently, was the ability to ever be sure she was really living either of them. I want to slow down for one of the best-loved episodes in the whole run, because at its center is a piece of technology so small and so stupid that it almost does not qualify, and yet the entire point of the episode is that this ridiculous little invention tells you more about Rick than any weapon ever could. The technology is a serum, and what the serum does is turn Rick into a pickle. That is it. He injects himself and becomes a pickle. A normal, small, green pickle, with his brain and his consciousness intact inside it, but no arms, no legs, no way to move. The reason he does it is the joke that becomes the whole story. The family has a scheduled therapy session, mandated after everything the household has been through, and Rick does not want to go. He would do anything to get out of sitting in a room and talking about his feelings. So he turns himself into a pickle, because you obviously cannot take a pickle to family therapy. He has, he thinks, engineered the perfect excuse. and he has planned it carefully. He has a syringe of antidote set aside that will turn him back once the therapy hour has safely passed. It is a temporary transformation, a stunt to dodge one appointment. Except Beth, seeing the mysterious syringe and not knowing what it is, takes it with her when the family leaves for therapy. And now Rick is stranded. He is a pickle, alone, immobile, with no way to reverse it and no way to even move across the room, and the antidote is gone. And what follows is one of the great sequences in the series, because Rick, refusing to simply wait for rescue, refusing above all to be helpless, builds himself back into a threat from nothing. He uses his tongue, insects, the body of a dead rat, sheer improvised engineering, and he constructs a mechanized exoskeleton, wiring a rat's corpse into a rig he controls, and turns himself into a murderous pickle in a rodent mech suit, and fights his way through an entire building full of armed men in an extended, brutal action set piece, all so that a pickle does not have to admit it needs help. The episode won a major television award, and it deserved it. But here is why it belongs on a list of broken technology rather than just a list of great episodes. The pickle serum itself is trivial. It is arguably the silliest invention in Rick's entire catalog. Nobody needs to become a pickle. And that is exactly the point the episode is making, because the story keeps cutting away from Rick's insane pickle adventure to the actual therapy session, where the therapist, a calm and unimpressed woman, is talking to Beth and Summer and eventually gets Rick himself in the room later. And she delivers the diagnosis the whole spectacular episode has been secretly building toward. She points out, in essence, that Rick is a man who possesses the intelligence to do literally anything, and who uses that staggering intelligence over and over, specifically to avoid the ordinary work of being a person. He would rather turn himself into a pickle and fight his way out of a fortified building than sit in a chair for an hour and feel something. The action is not despite his intelligence. It is the escape his intelligence buys him. That is the reading, and I think it is the key that unlocks half the gadgets on this list. We have spent this whole video looking at Rick's technology as feats, as breakthroughs, as evidence of how far his mind can reach. The pickle episode softly reframes all of it. What if the technology is not the achievement, but the avoidance? What if a man who can build a doorway to any universe builds it, on some level, so that he never has to stay in a room with his own feelings? The therapist's point is that Rick's brilliance and Rick's misery are the same engine. He is not smart in spite of being broken. He invents to keep from facing himself, and the pickle is the purest example because it is so obviously absurdly effortful, so much harder than just going to therapy, and he chooses it anyway, every time, in every form. A pickle rebuilding itself into a war machine out of a dead rat is the truest self-portrait the series ever drew of its own main character. It is easier for him to conquer a building than to sit still, and the little serum that started it, the dumbest invention on this entire list, is the one that gives the game away. We are moving now into the technology that messes with memory, and this is where the show gets its hands on the one thing most of us assume is untouchable: the private record of our own lives. There is a third season episode built entirely around a secret Rick has been keeping, and the secret is a room. Hidden away in the house, Rick has a lab full of small glass vials, each one containing a swirl of glowing liquid, and each vial is a memory. Specifically, each one is a memory Rick has extracted from Morty's head and stored on a shelf. There is a machine that does the extraction, pulling a chosen memory clean out of a person and sealing it in glass. And there is a companion headset that lets you plug back in and relive any memory you take down off the shelf. The framing of the episode is that Rick and Morty come to, disoriented, not knowing what they were just doing, and discover this collection, and start playing the memories back to figure out what happened, and each vial they open is a little self-contained story. But the premise underneath the gag is where it gets dark. These are not memories Morty chose to store like keepsakes. They are memories that have been removed from him, and the writing is careful to establish that they come in a few different flavors. Some of the vials are memories Morty himself asked to have taken out, things so traumatic or so humiliating that he begged Rick to make him forget, and Rick obliged. But others, And this is the part that curdles. Our memories Rick took out of Morty's head unilaterally, without asking, because he decided the boy was better off not carrying them. Or, in at least some cases, because the memory made Rick himself look bad. The collection is even sorted, color-coded, by whose fault the underlying event was, which means Rick has been keeping a filed, categorized archive of his grandson's forgotten traumas, some of them forgotten by Morty's request, and some of them forgotten by Rick's decision alone. Think about what that actually is, stripped of the comedy. Rick has the ability to reach into Morty's mind and delete a piece of his past, and he has used it, more than once, on his own authority, to edit who Morty is. Because that is what this is. We like to think of ourselves as something solid and continuous, but a huge part of what makes you you is simply the accumulated record of what has happened to you. The memories you carry, including and maybe especially the bad ones, the embarrassing ones, the ones that taught you to be careful. Take some of those out and you have changed the person. Not their body, not their circumstances, the actual person, the self that gets built out of remembered experience. And Rick has been doing exactly that to Morty, selectively, for who knows how long, curating the boy's inner life like a gardener pruning a hedge into a shape he prefers. The episode plays a lot of it for laughs, and some of the removed memories are deeply funny, small mortifications and absurd misadventures. But it keeps flashing the darker cards. There is at least one memory in that collection heavy enough to suggest Morty had been carrying something close to unbearable. And the reason the whole system exists at all is that this partnership, this endless string of adventures, generates trauma faster than a teenage mind can absorb it. The memory extractor is, in a sense, the maintenance technology that makes the entire show sustainable. Morty could not keep going out into the horrors of the multiverse week after week if he had to keep all of it. So it gets drained off and shelved, and he gets sent back out lighter, emptier, ready to be filled with fresh horror. The device is the release valve on a pressure cooker. Here is where I want to land, because it is a little different from the earlier gadgets that invade the body and the dreams. Those were violations of your private space. This is a violation of your continuity, which might be worse. A self is not really a thing. It is a story. The story you tell yourself about what happened and who you became because of it. And this technology means Morty's story has been secretly ghost-written. There are chapters missing that he does not know are missing, gaps in his own book edited out by someone else, some at his request and some behind his back. He cannot even mourn what was taken, because the taking included the memory that there was ever anything to take. And the implication that lingers, the one the episode leaves you holding, is that you would never know if it had been done to you. If a memory can be removed cleanly, along with the memory of removing it, then how confident are any of us, really, that the story we tell about ourselves is the whole one? These memory vials are broken technology not because they hurt Morty, but because they prove that the last thing you thought was truly, inviolably yours, the inside of your own past, is just one more thing a sufficiently advanced device, in the wrong loving hands, can reach in and rearrange. Since we are on the subject of extracting things from a person's mind, there is one more piece of memory technology in this show, and it is the sneakiest evil of all of them, because it is not built for revenge or science or even for a mad genius's convenience. It is built for retail. It comes from the third season episode that takes us onto the Citadel, the vast society of alternate Ricks and Mortys we touched on at the very start, and it shows us how that civilization actually runs, which is to say, badly and cruelly, and with the same commercial rot as any other society. And tucked inside that episode is the origin of a snack food. The snack is called Simple Rick's Wafers, and it is marketed as a nostalgia cookie, a treat that supposedly tastes like the pure, uncomplicated happiness of simpler times. And you find out where the flavor comes from. Somewhere in the bowels of a factory on the Citadel, there is a Rick, one particular Rick they call Simple Rick, and he is a prisoner. He is strapped into a machine, and that machine forces him to relive, over and over, on an endless loop, the single happiest memory of his life. The memory is a small domestic moment, a young father handing his 3-year-old daughter, his Beth, a little wooden toy, an ordinary afternoon of uncomplicated love, the kind of moment a person might treasure their whole life. And this man is trapped inside it, made to experience it again and again without end. And while he does, the machine harvests the brain chemicals his joy produces, the actual neurochemistry of that happiness, and it drains them off, liquefies them, and bakes them into the wafers. So when you eat a simple Rick's wafer, you are tasting the extracted joy of an imprisoned man reliving the best day of his life against his will, so that it can be siphoned out of him and sold to strangers. I do not think the show has ever done a darker single image than that, and it is remarkable how quickly the episode moves past it, treating it as just one more piece of set dressing in a wider story about the Citadel's politics. But I cannot move past it that fast, because of everything it stacks together. Start with the prison itself. We usually imagine hell as a place of torment, of pain and fire. This is the opposite, and it is worse. Simple Rick's hell is his happiest moment, on repeat, forever. The thing that should be his most precious possession, the memory of loving his little girl, has been turned into the exact mechanism of his imprisonment. He can never move forward, never make a new memory, never grieve or grow, because he is pinned inside the one good afternoon he ever had, and the good afternoon has become a cell. Then layer on top of that what the machine is doing with the harvest, because this is where the satire sharpens into something truly angry. The wafer is a nostalgia product. It is sold to people who want to feel, for a moment, the warmth of a simpler, happier past. And the way the company delivers that warmth is by finding a man who actually has that warmth, imprisoning him inside it, and industrially extracting it to sell by the box. That is not a random cruelty. That is a very precise piece of writing about how the feeling of the good old days gets packaged and sold, about an economy that will strip mine a real human being's real happiness and turn it into a mass-produced flavor, and about how the consumer eating the wafer never has to know, and would probably keep eating even if they did. The joy is real. The love the father felt for his daughter was completely genuine. The obscenity is what was done with it. This is where I come down, and it is the thing that makes this, to me, the worst device on the entire list, even though it does not warp space or cheat death. Every other invention we have discussed tonight breaks a rule of the physical world. This one breaks something more sacred than physics. It takes something deeply human, defensible, beautiful, a parent's love for a small child, and it treats that love as a raw material. It puts a meter on tenderness. It proves that in a sufficiently advanced and sufficiently heartless civilization, there is no feeling so private and so pure that it cannot be captured, refined, and sold, and that the purer the feeling is, the more it is worth on the shelf. The neutrino bomb can only kill you. Simple Rick's machine does something the writers clearly find more monstrous. It takes the one memory a man would have died to keep, and it makes it into a product, and it leaves him alive inside it, smiling, forever, so the flavor stays fresh. Let us go back to the first season for a device that makes a bigger philosophical claim than almost anything else in the show, and it does it while being one of the more low-key inventions on the list. In this episode, a new shop opens in town run by a charming, sinister man named Lucius Needful, and it becomes fairly clear fairly quickly that Mr. Needful is the devil, the actual devil, and his shop deals in cursed objects. The gimmick of the shop is elegant and old as folklore. Each item he sells does something wonderful, but every gift carries a hidden curse that turns the blessing into a punishment. A cologne that makes you irresistible also makes you impotent. A camera that makes you a better photographer does something terrible in exchange. Classic monkey's paw stuff, the bargain that always costs more than it gives, presided over by the literal Prince of Darkness. Summer takes a job at the shop, and Rick, once he clocks what Needful actually is, responds not with fear or awe, but with pure competitive irritation. He takes one of the cursed items, a microscope, and instead of being victimized by the curse the way a normal customer would, he tears it apart and reverse engineers it. And out of that he builds a device that can detect and quantify the curse itself, a scanner that reads the supernatural affliction on an object as if it were just another measurable property, like temperature or mass. And then he goes further. He builds the technology to strip the curses off entirely. He opens up his own operation, a rival to the devil's shop, and he calls it Curse Purge Plus. And the pitch is simple. Bring in any cursed object you bought from that other guy, and Rick's machines will remove the curse and leave you with the blessing. Free and clean, no catch. He undercuts the devil completely. He drives Satan out of business with a better gadget and a customer-friendly return policy. Now, the emotional engine of the episode is really about Rick and Summer, about Rick noticing his granddaughter is being taken advantage of by her charming new boss, and deciding, in his own graceless way, to look out for her, which is genuinely sweet if you squint. But for our purposes, what matters is the metaphysical claim buried in the plot. And it is a big one. Think about what it means that Rick can do this at all. The devil's curses are supposed to be supernatural. They are supposed to operate outside the rules, on a plane above science, in the domain of the soul and damnation and cosmic justice. That is the whole premise of a deal with the devil. You cannot science your way out of it. That is what makes it a deal. And Rick just does. He points a machine at a curse and reads it like a barcode, then flips a switch and deletes it. In doing so, the writers are making an argument they make over and over in 100 quieter ways, which is that there is no supernatural. There is no separate magical world above the physical one. There is only physics, and there is stuff we have not measured yet. And to a sufficiently advanced mind, even the devil's curses are just poorly documented engineering, a technology from a vendor with worse quality control than Rick. And I find that honestly one of the more unsettling implications in the whole series, more than the gore, more than the nihilism people always talk about. Because a lot of what makes the human world bearable, a lot of what gives events weight, depends on there being some floor of the sacred, some category of thing that is beyond tampering, off the table, not for sale, not subject to a gadget, good and evil, the soul, a deal you cannot take back, damnation that means something. This episode calmly removes that floor. It says the devil himself, the ultimate symbol of a moral order that transcends the physical, is just a small businessman with an inferior product. And any sufficiently smart person with a garage can put him out of business and then, in the episode's final gag, beat him up in the parking lot for good measure. There is nothing above the physics. Even hell has competitors. Here is my take, and it connects Curse Purge Plus to everything else we have looked at. The reason Rick is so casually destructive with all his other technology, the reason he can build a neutrino bomb before breakfast and enslave a universe to charge his car and file his own love under toxic waste, is that he lives in a world with no floor. For most people, there is always some line technology should not cross, some domain that belongs to God or fate or the soul, and that belief, whether or not it is true, restrains us. Rick has proven, to himself, in an afternoon, by beating the devil at his own game, that no such domain exists. There is nothing his tools cannot reach. And a man who has actually internalized that there is nothing sacred, nothing off limits, nothing above the reach of a good enough machine, is going to be exactly the kind of man we have spent this whole video describing. The scariest invention in this episode is not the curse scanner. It is the worldview it confirms. The last stretch of this video is about the biggest ideas, the technology that stops playing with objects and starts playing with reality itself. And I want to ease into it with simulation, because the series has a long-running fascination with fake worlds that feel completely real. And the clearest, saddest example is a video game. Back in the second season, Rick takes Morty to an alien arcade called Blips and Chits, a place stuffed with impossible games, and one of the machines there is a game called Roy. You put on a headset, and you become a man named Roy, and you live his life. Not a level of his life. His life. You are born, you grow up, you get a job selling carpets, you fall in love, you have a family, you get sick, you recover or you do not, you grow old, and the game scores you on how well you lived, and the whole time you are inside it, it feels entirely real. When Morty finishes a run of Roy in that early episode, he comes out shaken, blinking, having just experienced decades of a whole other man's existence in a few minutes of arcade time, and then he shakes it off and goes to play something else, because it was just a game. Years later, in the sixth season, the show goes back to that machine and does something with it I still think about. Morty ends up trapped inside the Roy game. There is a violent incident at the arcade, and Morty is stuck in the simulation with no way out. And to survive being trapped, his consciousness does something extraordinary and terrible. It fragments. It splits and spreads itself across the population of the game world, so that Morty is no longer playing one character named Roy, but is, somehow, distributed across billions of the game's inhabitants at once, living billions of simultaneous lives inside the simulation. And Rick has to go in after him. Rick enters the game as Roy himself, taking on the life of the very character the game is built around, in order to find and reassemble a grandson who has scattered himself across an entire artificial civilization to keep from being erased. Take the arcade premise seriously for a second, the way the show slyly dares you to. Roy is a machine, sitting on a floor between other machines, that generates a complete, convincing, decades-long human life, with a full interior experience, love and work, and loss and aging, all of it felt as real by whoever is inside. It is a whole life, dispensed for a token, played between snacks. Nobody at Blips and Chits treats it as anything but a diversion. You put in your money, you live and die as Roy. You take off the headset, you go get a drink. And the technology required to do that, to fabricate a lifetime of genuine experience convincing enough that you forget you were ever outside it, is so far beyond anything we would call world-changing that the casualness of it is the joke and the horror at once. In this universe, an entire human life, complete with everything that makes a life feel like it mattered, is arcade filler. It is the thing you play when the good machine is taken. And then the sixth season episode adds the part that turns it sincerely philosophical. Because when Morty scatters himself across billions of the game's people, it forces a question the show usually keeps at arm's length. Are those billions of simulated lives real? The people inside Roy's world experience themselves as fully alive. When Morty is living as billions of them, is he living billions of real lives, or none? The episode does not hand you a comfortable answer, and I think that is right, because the honest answer is unsettling. If a simulated life is experientially indistinguishable from a real one, felt just as fully from the inside, then the word just, as in it is just a game, stops doing any work at all. The suffering inside Roy is suffering. The love inside Roy is love. The machine does not produce a fake of those things. It produces the things. Here is my take, and it is the reason this humble arcade cabinet earns a place among the reality benders. Most of the broken technology on this list works by giving Rick power over the outside world, over space, over death, over other people. The Roy machine is different, because it points the power inward, at the nature of experience itself, and it makes a claim that should keep you up at night. It says a life does not have to be real, in the sense of happening in the base reality, to be real in the only sense that actually matters to the person living it, which is that it is felt. And once you accept that, the ground gets very soft under your feet, because you are left with no reliable way to know that your own life is not someone's token in someone's arcade, a Roy you are in the middle of, decades deep, having completely forgotten the headset. It plays this for laughs, a man selling carpets, a grandson lost in the machine, but the device is softly asking the oldest frightening question there is, and refusing to reassure you, and I respect it enormously for that, right up until it cuts to the next joke and lets you off the hook. If the Roy game is simulation used to entertain, the next example is simulation used as a weapon, and it comes from early in the first season, from a race of aliens called the Zagarians. The Zagarians are scammers. That is their whole culture essentially. A species of con artists, and what they want more than anything is the one secret I flagged near the top of this video, the formula for the concentrated dark matter that fuels Rick's portal travel. It is worth more than anything else he knows, the recipe for interdimensional movement itself, and the Zagarians have decided the way to get it out of him is not torture and not force, but deception on an enormous technical scale. So they build him a fake world. They capture Rick, Morty, and Jerry and drop them into a simulation, a fabricated version of their ordinary life so detailed that the characters do not realize they are inside it. And the Zagarians run their con from behind the scenes, manipulating events in the simulated world to steer Rick toward casually revealing his formula, the way a fake bank might trick you into typing your password. But the truly clever part is the nesting. Rick figures out he is in a simulation, and the moment he does, the Zygarians reveal that they anticipated that, and there is a second simulation underneath the first, so that when Rick thinks he has escaped into reality, he is actually still inside the con, one layer down. They stack fake worlds inside fake worlds, each one designed to catch him at the exact moment he lets his guard down, thinking he is finally out. What defeats them is pure Rick, and it is worth appreciating how it works. He is never actually fooled in the way they need him to be. He plays along, feeds them a completely fake formula while pretending to slip up, lets them think they have won, and meanwhile he sabotages the machine from the inside. The way he crashes the simulation is one of the great absurd images of the early show. He overwhelms the system's processing power, its equivalent of memory and computing capacity, by generating chaos inside it, culminating in an impromptu, ridiculous musical number, a rap performance so demanding for the simulation to render that the whole apparatus buckles under the load and collapses. He does not hack it with a virus or a clever bit of code. He crashes it by being too much for it to process, by flooding the fake world with more nonsense than its hardware can handle. But the detail that sticks with me, the thing that makes this episode secretly important, is how Rick figured out he was in a simulation in the first place, because it tells you something fundamental about him. He notices, essentially, that reality is running a little off. Small things are wrong, textures are not quite right, behaviors are slightly askew, the world does not have the full grain of the real one. And he notices because he is the kind of person who is always, at some level, checking. Rick moves through every world, real or fake, with a background hum of suspicion that none of it is genuine, that the walls might be painted on, that the people might be props. That paranoia is exactly what makes him impossible to trap in a simulation, because you cannot fool a man into thinking a fake world is real when he was never fully convinced the real one was real either. And that is where I will set the Zygarian simulation down, because it is the hinge between the small gadgets and the two enormous ideas we are about to end on. The reason simulations do not work on Rick is that Rick already lives as though reality might be a simulation. He already treats every universe as provisional, disposable, possibly fake, definitely replaceable. We watch that attitude get built, piece by piece, all the way through this list, through the portal gun that made every world interchangeable, through the save button that turned mistakes into other dimensions problems, through the cloning that dissolved the fact of who is real. By the time the Zygarians try to trap him in a fake world, Rick has no strong grip on the realness of any world left to exploit. His invulnerability to the con is not a triumph. It is a symptom. The scammers failed because they were trying to shatter an illusion of solid reality in a man who had already shattered it himself, years ago, and never put it back together. They came to steal the secret of how to travel between worlds, and they never understood that the man they were conning had long since stopped believing any of the worlds were worth arriving in. Before we climb to the two biggest ideas in the show, we need to talk about time, because Rick and Morty's relationship with time technology is one of the more deliberate and interesting choices the whole series makes, and it starts with a party. At the end of the first season, Rick throws a wild house party while the parents are away, and it gets completely out of hand, aliens and chaos and destruction, and as the party spirals, he reaches for a small device to fix the mess. It freezes time. He clicks it, and the entire universe stops. Everyone and everything held perfectly still, except for the people holding on to Rick, who remain free to move through the frozen world. The immediate use is mundane and funny. With time stopped, Rick, Morty, and Summer can calmly walk through the paused wreckage of the party and clean everything up, put every object back, undo the visible damage, with no one the wiser, because to the frozen guests, no time has passed at all. It is the ultimate cheat for anyone who has ever wanted a moment to fix a disaster before anyone notices. Pause the world, tidy up, unpause, and you are the only one who knows it ever went wrong. And if they had simply cleaned up and switched time back on, it would have been a clean little gag. But they do not, and this is where the device shows its teeth. They get comfortable in the frozen world. Living inside stop time is intoxicating because there is no pressure, no consequence, no one watching, an entire silent universe that belongs to you and only you, and so they leave it frozen, and they leave it frozen, and the pause stretches on far longer than any cleanup could justify. They end up leaving time stopped for something on the order of half a year, months of living inside a motionless world, before they finally get around to turning it back on. And the process of unfreezing, of restarting a universe that 3 separate people have been living in independently for months, is not clean, and it becomes the entire engine of the next season's premiere, which we will get to in a moment. But I want to stay on the time freezer itself first, because of what the temptation reveals. The reason they leave time frozen for months is not laziness. It is that a frozen world is a world with no other people in it, functionally, and that turns out to be deeply seductive to this particular family. When everyone else is paused, you are the only will that matters. Every person around you becomes an object, a mannequin, scenery you can arrange. There is no one to answer to, no one to disappoint, no one whose needs compete with yours, because everyone else has been reduced to furniture. And Rick, Morty, and Summer, 3 people who spend their normal lives grinding against each other and against the world, find that condition so relaxing they cannot bring themselves to end it. The device does not just stop time, it grants the fantasy of a universe with only you in it. And the fact that they indulge that fantasy for half a year tells you something a little sad about how exhausting they find the alternative, which is other people, moving and wanting things and being real. Here is my take, and it is the setup for everything that follows. The time freezer is the smallest scale version of the exact temptation the biggest technology in the show, the stuff we are about to discuss, offers on a cosmic scale. The temptation is to make the universe convenient by making everyone else less real. Freeze them, and they are objects. Portal away from them, and they are replaceable. Clone past them, simulate them, wall them off. Every one of these tools, from this little pause button all the way up to the reality-shaping weapons we are about to reach, offers the same forbidden comfort, which is a world arranged entirely around one person's will, with everyone else demoted to scenery. And the time freezer is where you first see how badly these characters want that, and how much damage they will accept in order to keep it a little longer. They broke the flow of time itself, and let reality start to come apart at the seams, rather than go back to sharing a universe with other people who were awake. The consequence of all that frozen time is the second season premiere, and it introduces a device that exists purely to clean up the mess the pause button made. And in doing so, the show says something clear and permanent about what kind of universe it is willing to be. When Rick finally unfreezes time, there is a problem. 3 people, Rick, Morty, and Summer, lived independently inside that frozen span, making their own separate choices, and when time restarts with 3 uncollapsed possibilities baked into the same moment, reality cannot decide which version of events is the real one. So it does not decide, it splits. The timeline fractures into parallel branches, uncertain and overlapping, a visual gag drawn straight from quantum physics, where the screen literally divides to show 2 or more slightly different versions of the same scene playing out at once, because the universe is now plainly unsure which one happened. To fix this, a strange 4th-dimensional being becomes involved, a creature that exists outside normal time and polices this kind of temporal damage, and Rick gets his hands on the tool for the job. It is a set of collars, time-stabilizing collars, worn around the neck, and their function is to lock the wearer's timeline down, to force the uncertain branches back together into a single definite thread of events. Put the collars on, keep everyone's choices synchronized, and the split realities can be refused into one. But of course, it does not go smoothly. One of the collars is faulty, and Rick's own meddling and mistrust keep making things worse. And instead of collapsing back to one timeline, the situation keeps splitting further, dividing into more and more parallel versions, dozens of realities all running slightly out of step, before Rick finally manages to force them all back into one and stabilize things. Now here is the thing I most want you to notice about this episode, and it is a piece of authorial discipline I find deeply admirable. Look at what this device does not do. It does not send anyone back in time. It does not let Rick travel to the past to unthrow the party, or forward to see how things turn out. There is no time machine anywhere in this story, even though it is the show's big-time episode. Rick and Morty, as a series, made a deliberate, standing decision very early on to not do conventional time travel, and it has held to that decision with remarkable consistency across its entire run. The show that will happily give you a device to erase someone from all of reality flatly refuses to give you a machine that goes to yesterday. And that refusal is not an oversight. It is a rule, and the characters even joke about it, treating time travel as a cheap gimmick they are above. Why does that matter, and why do I think it is the smartest constraint the writers ever imposed on themselves? Because time travel, real time travel, would break the one thing this entire series is actually about. Every piece of technology we have discussed tonight, every last one, is in some way a fantasy of escaping consequence. And the show keeps letting its characters chase that fantasy and then showing them the hidden bill. But it always makes them pay it going forward. You can flee to a new dimension, but the old one still happened and you still buried yourself in the yard. You can reload your save, but a version of you died for it. You can clone yourself, freeze time, delete a memory, and in every case, the past remains fixed and real, and the cost simply gets displaced somewhere else in the present. Time travel would ruin all of that, because time travel is the one cheat that actually unmakes the past, that lets an event truly never have happened, and a show whose entire moral engine is that you cannot undo what you did, you can only run from it or displace it or live with it, cannot afford to own that machine, so it refuses. That is the take, and it reframes this whole list. The time-stabilizing collars are a device for managing branches, not for erasing the trunk. When reality splits, the collars force it back to a single line. They make the characters commit to one version of what happened, rather than letting them keep all the possibilities open. Which means even the show's premier time technology is, at its core, a machine for accepting consequence, for collapsing the comforting cloud of what if back down into the hard singular fact of what was. In a series overflowing with tools for dodging the weight of your choices, the time episode's real invention is the one thing that forces a choice to finally count. And I find it rather beautiful that the writers understood that so early, that they knew a story about a man who can do anything would only mean something if there remained one thing even he was not allowed to do, which is reach back and pretend it never happened. That door stays locked. Everything else in the garage is for sale, but not that one. There is one more device I want to put in front of you before we reach the two biggest ideas, because it is the one that first hints at the person who will eventually break the whole system, and it softly inverts everything the show has taught you about who holds the power. It comes from the back half of the first season, in the episode that first takes us deep into the world of the Citadel and the many Ricks. And it involves a Rick who wears an eye patch, and the Morty who is really in charge of him. For most of that episode, you are led to believe you are looking at an especially cold, especially dangerous Rick. A Rick who has been hunting and killing other Ricks, aided by an unusually quiet, unusually competent Morty at his side. And then the reveal lands, and it recontextualizes the entire hierarchy of the show. The Rick with the eye patch is not the mastermind at all. He is a puppet. He is, the episode establishes, a separate Rick who has been lobotomized and turned into a kind of cyborg, and he is being remotely controlled, operated from the inside, by the Morty standing next to him. The eye patch is part of the control apparatus, the interface through which the Morty pilots him. The Morty is the one giving the orders. The Rick is just the hardware. And I want to be precise, because this gets misremembered a lot. This puppeted Rick is not the show's main Rick, not the Rick we follow. He is his own separate individual, hollowed out and wired up to be driven like a vehicle by the small, quiet boy the fandom would come to call Evil Morty. Stop and appreciate how completely that breaks the show's central law. The entire premise of Rick and Morty, stated in the title, in the structure, in every episode, is that Rick is the mind and Morty is the tag-along, the sidekick, the accessory. Rick is the genius, and Morty is the frightened grandson dragged along behind him. That relationship is the machine the whole series runs on. And this device, this control rig operated through an eye patch, takes that machine and runs it backward. It puts a Morty in the driver's seat and reduces a Rick, one of these godlike super geniuses, to a remote-controlled body, a drone of meat and circuitry, doing exactly what the boy at the controls decides. The technology's whole function is the inversion of the natural order of this universe. It proves that a Rick, for all his intelligence, is still just a system, and any system can be hijacked, lobotomized, and driven by someone patient and ruthless enough to seize the controls. And the someone who does it is the key to everything, because this is the first appearance of the character who becomes the show's true architect of change, Evil Morty. We are not going to unpack his whole arc tonight, because that is its own video, and this one is about the technology, but you need to understand what this early device establishes about him, because it is the seed of the finale. Evil Morty's entire method, from this first appearance onward, is exactly what he does with the eye patch Rick. He does not try to be a stronger Rick. He does not out-invent them. He studies the system, finds the point where a mind can be turned into a machine, and he takes control of it from the inside. He treats these all-powerful geniuses not as gods to be defeated, but as hardware to be operated. And once you have seen him do that to a single Rick with an eye patch, you understand what he is capable of doing, later, to the entire structure the Ricks built around themselves. Here is my take, and it is the bridge into the last part of this video. Everything on this list until now has been Rick's technology, Rick as the inventor, Rick as the one with the power, the whole multiverse arranged around the fact that he is the smartest thing in it. The eye patch device is the first crack in that. It is the first time the show says, subtly, that intelligence is not the same as control, that being the mind in the room does not protect you from becoming someone else's instrument, that even a Rick can be reduced to a tool if the right person gets behind him. And it plants that idea using a Morty of all things, the one figure in the entire show that everyone, in universe and out, has been trained to underestimate. What is broken about the eye patch is not the lobotomy or the wiring. It is the lesson it teaches the boy who is holding the controls, the lesson he will spend seasons perfecting, which is that the smartest beings in all of reality are still just machines, and machines can be taken over. Hold on to that, because the being who learned it is about to walk up to the largest machine in the entire show and switch it off. So now we arrive at the first of the two most broken pieces of technology in the entire show, and it is not a gadget you can hold. You cannot pick it up. You cannot point it at anyone. It is so large that most viewers watched the series for years without even realizing it was there, shaping everything, the invisible architecture behind every single adventure. It is called the Central Finite Curve, and it was revealed, properly, in the finale of the 5th season, and when it landed, it retroactively rewrote the meaning of the whole series up to that point. Let me build up to what it is, because the scale is the entire point. The multiverse of this show is infinite, truly infinite, endless universes containing every possible variation of everything, which means, among an infinity of possibilities, there are universes where Rick Sanchez was never born, universes where he died as a child, universes where he is a janitor, a coward, a saint, a nobody, universes where the smartest being is someone else entirely, or where there is no dominant genius at all. In a truly infinite multiverse, the universes where Rick is the smartest man alive are a vanishingly tiny fraction of the whole. They are a rounding error. Rick, statistically, should almost never be the central figure in the room, because across all of infinity, he is mostly ordinary, mostly absent, mostly not special at all. And yet, every single universe we ever visit in this show has a Rick in it, and in almost all of them, that Rick is the smartest, most dangerous being around. Every world has its Rick and its Morty. For years, that just felt like the format, the premise, the joke. The finale reveals it was a construction. The Ricks, long ago, took the infinite multiverse and walled off a piece of it. They built a boundary, a curve, around exactly the subset of all possible universes in which a Rick is the smartest creature in existence, always shadowed by his Morty, and they sealed that subset off from the rest of infinity. Everything outside the wall, all the countless universes where Rick is nothing special or does not exist at all, was excluded, cut off, made unreachable, and everything the show has ever shown you takes place inside that wall. That is the central finite curve. It is a fence around a garden, and the garden contains only the universes that flatter Rick Sanchez. This is why the portal gun, for all its power, has a leash. The leash I asked you to hold on to near the start of this video. For most of the series, the portal gun can only travel to universes inside the curve, because the curve is the entire accessible playground. When Rick portals to another dimension and finds another Rick, it is not chance. It is because the wall guarantees it. He built himself a section of infinity where he can never not be the main character, and then he handed himself a doorway that can only open onto that section. Every world he has ever explored, every alternate self he has ever met, every adventure across the multiverse, all of it has happened inside a curated exhibit designed so that no matter where he goes, he remains the smartest thing in creation. He did not conquer infinity, he fenced off the flattering part and threw away the rest. And the finale adds the detail that turns this from a clever idea into a devastating character judgment. At the very center of the curve, at the exact middle of this walled garden of Rick-worshipping universes, is our Rick. The show implies he is the Rickest Rick, the central example, and strongly suggests he is the one who invented the concept in the first place, the architect of the wall. Sit with what that means as a self-portrait. Given access to the literal infinite, given every possible version of reality to explore, the thing Rick Sanchez chose to do with that unimaginable gift was to build a structure with himself at the dead center of it, a cosmos shaped like his own ego, an infinity pruned down to only the branches where he is God. All the pain we have talked about tonight, all the running and the drinking and the refusal to feel, and it turns out the largest thing he ever built was a monument to his own centrality, a universe-sized mirror. But the reason the central finite curve is broken technology, and not just a sad piece of set design, is what happens to it, and who does it. Because someone got out. We just talked about him, the quiet boy with the eye patch-controlled Rick, the one who learned early that even a Rick is a machine that can be hijacked. Evil Morty spent seasons working toward one goal nobody else even understood was possible, which was to leave. Not to rule the Citadel, not to kill a particular Rick, not to win any of the games the Ricks play with each other. To get out of the box entirely. And to do it, he needed to know how the wall was built, so he did the thing that is his signature. He got access to our Rick's mind, to the brain of the very architect, and scanned it, extracting the knowledge he needed to breach the curve, the way you would read a blueprint out of a locked drawer. And then he used that knowledge to blow a hole in it. He opened a breach in the wall around infinity and escaped through it, out of the curated garden and into the true, uncontrolled, infinite multiverse beyond, the one full of universes where Rick is nobody, the part Rick spent his whole life pretending was not there. That yellow portal Evil Morty walked through is one of the defining images in the whole series, and I want to tell you why. For the entire run of the show, Rick's technology has been about control disguised as freedom. The portal gun looks like ultimate freedom and is actually a leash to a walled garden. The immortality looks like liberation from death and is actually an inability to let anything matter. The whole apparatus is a man building ever more elaborate cages and calling them adventures. And it takes a Morty, the one figure everyone underestimates, to look at the single largest structure Rick ever made, the wall around infinity itself, and simply refuse it. Evil Morty did not want to be the smartest being in a rigged game. He wanted out of the game. He looked at Rick's monument to his own importance and found it claustrophobic, and he left. And in leaving, he permanently changed the rules of the multiverse, because the wall has a hole in it now and cannot be made whole again. The central finite curve tops this list for a scale reason, because it is the only device here whose canvas is infinity itself. But it is also broken in the sadder sense, the sense we keep circling, because it is the ultimate expression of the thing wrong with the man who built it. He had all of everything, and he used it to make sure he would always, always be the center. And a child he had trained to feel small looked at that and understood, correctly, that it was a prison. And so we come to it, the last device, the one this whole video has been building toward, the single most broken invention in the entire Rick and Morty multiverse. Everything else on this list, every gadget and serum and wall we have discussed tonight, gives something. It gives power, or travel, or life, or a fake world, or a wall to hide behind. This one only takes. It is the darkest invention in the show, precisely because it is the only one whose entire function is subtraction, and what it subtracts is total and permanent, and reaches into places even the portal gun cannot follow. It is called the Omega device, and it belonged to the man everyone calls Rick Prime, the alternate Rick who, as we discussed all the way back at the start, murdered our Rick's wife and daughter on the night that set the entire series in motion. Here is what the Omega device does, and you need to hold the full shape of it in your mind, because it is really difficult to absorb. Take any individual, any single person, anywhere. The device is capable of annihilating not just that person, but every version of that person that exists anywhere across the whole of infinity, all at once, forever. If it destroys even one variant of a chosen individual, it propagates outward through the entire multiverse and erases all of them, every copy, in every reality, in every timeline, throughout the whole of existence. It does not kill a person. It unexists them everywhere, in every universe that ever contained them, simultaneously and irreversibly. There is no dimension left where they survived. There is no timeline you can portal to where they are still alive, because the device does not operate on one world. It operates on the entire set of worlds at once. Do you see now why this is the ultimate horror of a show built on the multiverse? The entire comfort of this universe, the thing that makes death and loss and mistakes survivable for these characters, is multiplicity. Someone dies, and there are infinite other versions of them out there. You ruin a world, and you portal to a fresh one. You kill a Morty, and there is always another Morty. The infinite has always been the escape hatch, the thing that softens every tragedy, because nothing is ever truly gone when everything exists in endless copies. The Omega device is the one thing in all of creation that closes that hatch. It is the multiverse's answer to itself, a weapon that turns infinity from a source of endless second chances into the exact measure of how completely someone can be destroyed. In a finite world, killing someone ends one life. In this infinite world, the Omega device ends infinite lives with a single use, and it is the only thing that can reach far enough to make a loss actually final. And Rick Prime used it on Diane. This is the fact at the bottom of the entire series, and I need to be very precise about it, because it is the one thing you have to get right about this show, and it is the one people most often get wrong. Our Rick's wife, Diane, is not dead in the ordinary sense. She is not gone from one timeline. Rick Prime used the Omega device to erase Diane from every reality that has ever existed. There is no universe, anywhere in the infinite multiverse, where Diane Sanchez is still alive. There is no dimension our Rick could portal to and find her waiting. There is no version of that home, that marriage, that family, intact somewhere across infinity for him to slip into the way he once slipped into a dead double's life after the Cronenberg disaster. That door, the one door he actually wants, is the only door in all of existence that is permanently, absolutely closed, and it was closed on purpose, by the man who killed her, using the one device in reality capable of closing it. Diane exists now only in memory. That is all that is left of her, in the whole of infinity. A memory in the mind of a man who can travel anywhere except to her. I asked you, at the very beginning of this video, to hold on to a thought. I said that Rick spends the series running from a home he can never actually get back to because the version of it he wants does not exist anymore in any reality at all. This is why. This is the mechanism behind that sentence. It is not poetic exaggeration. It is the literal, canonical, technological truth of the show. Rick Sanchez owns a device that can take him to any universe he can imagine, and there is exactly one thing he wants that it cannot reach. And the reason it cannot reach it is that another Rick used a bigger device to remove that thing from every universe at once. The portal gun and the Omega device are the two poles the entire series runs between. One says you can always find another version of what you lost. The other says, once, cruelly, no you cannot, not this, not ever. This one is gone from all of it. Everything Rick does, the drinking, the cruelty, the endless motion, all of it is a man living in the gap between those two devices, holding the one that promises everything can be replaced, grieving the one thing that proved it cannot. The device comes to a head in the 7th season, in the long-awaited confrontation between our Rick and Rick Prime, the reckoning the show had been promising since it first told us the truth about that night. And when the two of them finally clash, Rick Prime, cornered, reaches for the Omega device again, and this time he tries to use it not just on one person, but to erase Rick's entire family, to do to everyone our Rick loves what he once did to Diane, to wipe the whole family out of every reality at a stroke. And here the show does something almost merciful, though it comes at a cost. Rick Prime does not manage to complete it. The device, in that moment, erases only one figure, a minor character caught in the blast, a fellow named Slow Mobius, rather than the family it was aimed at. The deadliest weapon in existence, pointed at everyone Rick loves, and it takes only a bystander. The family survives. But the fact that it came that close, that the same device that took Diane was one bad moment away from taking all of them too, tells you exactly how thin the thread is that these characters hang by. And then there is the ending of the Omega device, which I think is one of the largest quiet decisions any character makes in the entire series, and it involves, once again, Evil Morty, the boy who gets out of boxes. Because the knowledge of how to build the Omega device did not die with Rick Prime. Evil Morty, doing the thing he always does, had gotten into a mind and read what was written there, scanning the device's schematics, the complete blueprint for the deadliest weapon in reality, and that knowledge existed, loose, in the multiverse, capable of being rebuilt. A weapon that can erase anyone from all of existence, and now the plans for it were out. That should be the beginning of an arms race, the setup for infinite escalation. Instead, our Rick does something with it I still find startling. He takes the schematics, the plans for the ultimate weapon, and he places them inside the Omega device itself, and then he destroys the device, so that in destroying it, it erases its own blueprints along with itself, wiping the knowledge of how to ever recreate it out of the entire multiverse. He uses the weapon's own logic against it. He makes the Omega device delete the Omega device from all of reality, the way it once deleted a person, so that not only is the device gone, but the very possibility of the device is gone, unrecoverable, forever. The worst technology in the show ends by being pointed at itself. Stay with that choice for a moment, because it is the closest thing to redemption the character reaches on this entire subject. Rick Sanchez, the man who fenced off infinity to keep himself at its center, the man who hoards the formula for interdimensional travel in his own skull and shares nothing, had in his hands the plans for the deadliest weapon in all of existence, a weapon that had personally destroyed the love of his life. He could have kept it, he could have used it, he could have become, with it, unopposable, the one being who could threaten anyone in any reality with true, total, infinite death. And instead, he chose to make it impossible. He chose to reach into the multiverse and remove, permanently, the ability to ever do to anyone else what was done to Diane. It is the one time in the whole series that Rick uses the logic of erasure not to win, but to close a door so that no one, including himself, can ever open it again. He could not bring Diane back. Nothing can. But he could make sure the specific method used to take her from everywhere could never take anyone from everywhere again. And he did. And he asked no one for permission and made no speech about it. He just deleted the worst thing he had ever encountered from the whole of reality and let it stay deleted. That is the image I want to close the technology on, because I think it is the truest thing the show ever said about what all these broken devices are for. For the entire series, Rick's inventions have been engines of escape, ways to dodge consequence, replace what is lost, avoid what hurts, and stay always at the center of everything. The Omega device is the show's final word on that project. And the word is that some things cannot be escaped or replaced. That loss can be real and total and permanent even in an infinite universe. That not everything comes in endless copies. And the most broken device in the multiverse turns out to teach a deeply human lesson, which is that the measure of a person is not what they can do with a weapon that reaches into every reality at once, but whether, holding it, they choose to put it down. Rick built a door to everywhere. Someone used the one thing bigger than that door to take away the only place he ever wanted to walk to. And in the end, given the power to do the same to others, he chose to erase the power instead. It does not heal him, it does not bring her back. But it is, I think, the one unambiguously good thing the smartest man in the universe ever did with the worst thing he ever found, and the show was right to build its longest, saddest arc around it. Before we close the lid on all of this, I want to come back down from the reality-erasing weapons to something much humbler that has been sitting in plain sight, in the garage, this whole time, because I think it might tell you more about him than any other gadget in the show, and it is the one we are most trained to overlook. It is the spaceship. Rick's flying saucer, the beat-up little craft he uses to get around, the one that has been there since near the beginning. We looked earlier at the horrifying intelligence bolted into it, the defense system that once took a simple instruction to keep Summer safe and carried it to a monstrous conclusion, so I will not walk back through that. What I want to talk about now is the ship itself, the object, and where it came from, because the origin of it is a joke that turns out to be a thesis. Rick did not buy this ship. He did not requisition it from some advanced civilization or steal it from a fleet. He built it, in his garage, out of garbage. Actual garbage. Scrap, junk, discarded pieces of household trash and whatever was lying around, assembled by hand into a functioning interstellar vehicle capable of crossing galaxies and, powered as it is by that impossible little universe in a battery we discussed earlier, of doing things no human machine could dream of. It looks like garbage too. That is the running gag. It is ugly and cobbled together and unimpressive to look at, and characters comment on it, and Rick does not care, because the appearance is beside the point. The point is that a man sat in a suburban garage and turned literal refuse into a starship in an afternoon. Take that seriously for a second, the way the show dares you not to, because it is easy to laugh past. The single greatest bottleneck on human civilization, the thing that limits everything we can do, is resources and energy and the enormous cost of getting off the planet. And this is a man who has so completely solved those problems that he can build a craft that mocks all of them out of the contents of a trash can for personal use, as a runabout. Think about how much of human history is a story of scarcity, of people fighting and starving and dying over who gets access to too little of something. Land, food, fuel, clean water. Every war, most of the cruelty, a great deal of the grief. And the answer to nearly all of it is sitting in a suburban garage, disguised as a piece of junk, because the man who worked it out finds the problem beneath his interest. He treats the end of scarcity the way you or I would treat a solved crossword, a thing he finished and set aside and never thought about again. The ship is a standing, casual demonstration that for Rick, there is no scarcity. There is no material he needs that he cannot conjure from junk, no energy problem he cannot solve with a device most people would throw away. He is, functionally, a one-man post-scarcity civilization walking around inside a world still fighting over oil and land and money, and he expresses that godlike abundance by making himself a slightly nicer car out of trash and never sharing the method with anyone. And that is what honestly damns him, and it is where I will rest my case on the ship. Rick could end scarcity. The evidence is parked in the garage. A man who can build a galaxy-crossing vessel out of garbage could, if he wanted, hand the human race the stars. He could solve energy, hunger, disease, the whole grinding weight of human limitation, with a fraction of the effort he pours into his weekend adventures. The knowledge is right there in his head, the same head that keeps the dark matter formula locked away, the same instinct that walled off infinity to keep himself at the center of it, and he does not share any of it. He uses the ability to make a personal toy. The ship is proof that Rick's failure is not a failure of power. It is a failure of care. He has, demonstrably, the capacity to lift up everyone around him and he uses it instead to build himself a marginally more convenient way to get to the store and back. And he lets the rest of the universe keep struggling in the dark. He could switch off anytime he chose. But I do not want to end this one entirely on the indictment, because there is a softer thread in the ship too, and it is the reason I saved it for last among the devices. Over the course of the series, the ship starts to feel like more than a machine. There are small moments that imply something like loyalty in it, something like devotion. It defends the family, sometimes with terrifying zeal. It waits, it endures, it comes back. And whether or not you read genuine feeling into it, the ship becomes, over the years, the one piece of Rick's technology that reliably stays, that does not turn on him, that is not a weapon he has to disarm, or a mind he has to trap, or a wall he has to escape. It is just there, ugly and faithful, made of the things everyone else threw away, keeping the people he cannot admit he loves alive. And there is something almost unbearably fitting about that the steadiest presence in the life of the loneliest man in the multiverse is a thing he built out of garbage and never once thanked. The ship asks for nothing. It just keeps them safe, in its horrifying literal way, and waits in the garage for a man who treats everything he ever made as disposable and does not leave. So that is the tour. From the little green doorway clipped to a belt, all the way out to a weapon that can reach into every reality at once and take a single person out of all of them. And if you have stayed with me this far, drifting in and out, half asleep by now I hope, I want to spend a last few minutes just pulling back from the individual gadgets and looking at the whole strange collection at once, because I think there is something in the shape of it worth carrying off to sleep with you. Here is the thing that strikes me, having laid all of these side by side. A lesser show would have used this technology as wish fulfillment. That is what most science fiction does with a bottomless bag of impossible inventions. It lets you dream. It says, imagine if you could travel anywhere, live forever, undo your mistakes, pause the world, know your future, be the smartest person alive. And for a little while it lets you feel what that might be like, and it sends you home wishing you had a portal gun of your own. Rick and Morty has all of that hardware, more of it than almost any story ever assembled in one place, and it does something almost perverse with it. It uses every single one of these miracles to make an argument against the wish. It takes the fantasy of unlimited power, and it patiently, joke by joke, shows you the hollow at the center of it. Because look at what all this technology actually buys the man who owns it. He can go anywhere, and there is nowhere he wants to be. He can live forever, and he cannot find a single life worth taking seriously. He can replace anything he loses, which means he has never learned to hold on to anything. He can pause the world, and what he does with the pause is hide from other people. He can build minds, and he builds them carelessly and lets them suffer. He can beat the devil, cheat death, wall off infinity, and none of it, not one piece of it, has made him less alone or less afraid or 1 inch closer to the one ordinary thing he actually wanted, which was a home and a family and a wife. Back before any of the inventions existed, back when he was just a man in a garage who had not yet been given a reason to build a door out of the world. The technology did not save him from his grief. The technology is what his grief built. And the show is honest enough across all these years and all these gadgets to never once let the toys fix the wound. They only ever get bigger and more impressive and more broken, and the wound stays exactly the same size. I think that is why the series has lasted the way it has, and why people keep coming back to pull it apart the way we have tonight. It looks, from the outside, like a loud cartoon about a genius and his grandson having adventures, and it is that, and it is very funny. But underneath the color and the noise, it is one of the more sustained meditations on power that television has produced. And its conclusion is a deeply unfashionable one. It says that being able to do anything is not the same as having a reason to, that intelligence is not wisdom and power is not peace, and that a person who can reach the whole of infinity can still be standing in the exact same place, emotionally, as the loneliest person you know. Every device we talked about is, in the end, a variation on one question the show keeps asking and refusing to answer comfortably. If you could do absolutely anything, would it actually be enough? And the man with the biggest toolbox in all of creation is the standing, stumbling, drunken answer. No, it would not. It is not. And yet, and this is the last thing I want to leave you with, the show is not finally cruel about it. For all its darkness, it keeps finding these small, buried, almost embarrassed gestures of care hidden inside the machinery. The immortality silently extended to a granddaughter who was never told. The ultimate weapon destroyed rather than kept, so that no one would ever suffer what its owner suffered. The faithful ship in the garage, made of garbage, asking for nothing, staying anyway. The technology here is broken, all of it, every last piece. But the people carrying it are not entirely broken. Not quite. And the difference between those two things, between a broken tool and a not quite broken heart, is more or less the whole show. That is what the gadgets are really for. They are the loud, ridiculous, world-ending backdrop against which you can just make out a family failing to say they love each other, and occasionally, once in a great while, managing it anyway, in the only language any of them trust, which is not words. It is what they build, and what they choose not to. So as you drift off now, you do not need to hold on to the portal fuel or the microverse or the wall around infinity, or any of the names and numbers we went through. Let those wash away. If you keep anything, keep the small thing at the bottom of all of it. The most broken technology in the multiverse was built by a man trying to get back to a home that no longer exists in any reality at all. And the saddest and most human fact about him is that with all of infinity at his fingertips, the only thing he could never build was the one thing he actually wanted. There is a strange comfort in that, I think, for those of us with far smaller lives and no gadgets at all. It turns out the things that matter most were never the ones you could invent your way to. Thank you for spending this long, quiet stretch of the night with me, and with Paper Town. I hope somewhere in the middle of all that you slipped under, and that whatever tomorrow is asking of you feels a little lighter for the rest. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.